You're watching the Junction's live coverage of the 2019 federal election. Going live on Channel 31 in Melbourne, Channel 44 in Adelaide, WTV in Perth and online.
Well, the polls have just closed in the eastern states and the votes are being counted right now. Good evening and welcome to Election 2019, coming to you live from the studios of RMIT University in Melbourne. I'm Rachel Merritt.
And I'm Ari Bourbo-Ness. We're broadcasting to you live from the studios of RMIT University in Melbourne, going out on Channel 31 in Melbourne, Channel 44 in Adelaide, WTV in Perth, and on community radio stations across Australia.
Over the next 2 hours, we will be bringing you the latest on the federal election counting with our team of students at the crucial polling booths, keeping an eye on what's been happening.
For the first time for a live national election coverage, the TV reporting team is made up of students from universities all over Australia, including WA, Queensland, where I'm from, and New South Wales and South Australian universities in Melbourne, including, of course, RMIT, where we're broadcasting from.
The students from these universities are all part of the Junction, a cooperative website between the universities covering the election. This program is also being broadcast live on the Junction website, and this broadcast has been made possible by the generous support of the Judith Neilson Institute for Journalism and Ideas.
We'll cross to the first of our reporters in a moment, but first, let's introduce our panellist experts for tonight's show. From Monash University, lecturer in politics, Dr. Paul Strangio, who's been looking at the issues that have affected the election campaign. How you going, Paul?
Ari.
Joining Paul is someone who knows the ins and outs of federal politics, author of a book about Julia Gillard, Mary Delahunty. Mary, can I start with you? What sense are you getting from electorates at this early stage?
Well, it's, as they say, very early. It's probably about 10 votes have been counted already, Ari. But there is a sense in the community that perhaps a change is on. That's certainly been the argument from the opposition. The Labor Party has been running a very positive, forthright campaign with a suite of policies and the argument that it is time to change. The government has said, no, don't risk change. What you see is what you're probably going to get if you re-elect the Morrison government. But there is a feeling that the climate issue has been predominant this time, and also that more young people have enrolled to vote, and who knows which way they will fall. But in the past, of course, the younger the voter, the more progressive has been their choice. So it could be tonight a change in the tectonic plates of politics in Australia.
Well, Mary, we know from the state election last year, Victoria Votes, you were able to predict a Labor landslide win. Do you think that Labor will have the same luck tonight?
Well, of course, I am influenced because I'm Victorian, and this is a very progressive state, as we saw last November. A state that is interested in climate change, same-sex marriage, for example, fairly keen to see some changes around climate change policy in particular, but also education and health and big spending in that area. So I think that in Victoria, the Labor Party will do exceptionally well. The other states are a bit harder to call. Queensland is a mystery to me. I'm sorry, Ari, but it's an absolute mystery to me. And New South Wales, I think, will hold for both parties. There won't be much change there.
Well, just looking around Australia, people in South Australia still are going to the booths right now. Do you think that the results in the eastern states might affect the way they vote?
Not in South Australia. Oh, they're very independent in South Australia. They make up their own mind, is my experience watching these elections. Perhaps in the West it might be different. But I think certainly in South Australia they have a long history, and Paul will know more about this than I, a long history in voting independent of the rest of Australia, particularly the eastern states.
Paul, would you like to weigh in on this?
Well, I think it's true that there's considerable regional variation between the states, and Mary has already noted that Victoria is a very different place politically, and it has a very different political culture. For example, Western Australia or Queensland, Victoria is now dubbed the Massachusetts of Australia, to say, in other words, that its orthodox position is now to be progressive, default Labor, if you like, and certainly the history since 1980 very much confirms that. In Victoria, Labor has won the two-party preferred vote here 12 out of the last 14 federal elections. But this is a national election, so we will see a lot of variation between the states. I think if Labor wins tonight, and the polls certainly suggest that, they've all landed now on around the 51.5 mark, and that would suggest a reasonably narrow but still workable majority. And I think to not see now a Labor victory, given that all the polls have now pretty well landed on that mark, would suggest a pretty fluky result, and you've got to go in for some pretty strange assumptions about how the coalition could now hang on to government. But I think if it does occur, that Victoria will probably be the bedrock of a Labor victory.
So, Paul, you said that Victoria has quite a different political culture to the rest of Australia. As we're broadcasting from Victoria tonight, could you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, it is the most progressive state, and we're particularly talking about Melbourne, of course, and this is a product of history, it's a product of demographics, it's a product of multiculturalism, and we see it reflected in so many different ways. You know, the votes in the recent same-sex plebiscite, we see it, you know, even reflected in things like protests. Victorians are naturally, I think, more progressive, more concerned about some of the issues that are seen on the progressive side. And climate change is clearly an issue that has become to exemplify that, and I think will be reflected again in this result here. The Liberal Party is struggling here in Victoria, and one of the reasons undoubtedly has been the view, and this includes voters who normally actually side with the Liberal Party. This is the view that the Liberal Party has dropped the ball on that, has been paralysed, divided. And we saw, I think, a sense of this obviously at the state election, and now the key question is, will that also be manifest tonight federally?
Paul, we're seeing a lot of early voting. What do you think that indicates for the government? And Mary, I would like you to jump in on that as well.
Look, it is true, and it looks like almost maybe 1/3 of voters, around 30% of voters will have cast an early ballot. This is a trend now. It's been building. We're seeing it both at federal elections and state elections. I don't necessarily think we should read too much into it. You know, there's some belief out there, this shows there's a whole lot of people just waiting with their baseball bats and they've wanted to race to the polling booths to whack the government over the head. I don't think it, I think it's more just a change in voting behaviour. This has now been normalised as a way to vote. And it is one interesting element of this is what issues it creates for the count tonight. We saw in the state election again in November, large pre-poll vote. Because those votes tend to come in late and they're hard to incorporate, it can cause some bumps in the count about mid-evening.
Okay, we're going to have to just quickly move on from that one. Dr. Paul Strangio, Mary, thank you for your insight. We'll be hearing from you across the evening. Feel free to interrupt us at any point with whatever you get coming in.
Happy to do so.
Thanks. Now we'll cross to Jesse Burns in the green room. He'll give us a rundown on what the key seats playing in this election are. Jesse.
Yes, thanks guys. Well, Scott Morrison and Bill Shorten come into tonight's battle not only for the Prime Ministership but also perhaps to decide the future of their political careers. Both entered politics at the 2000 election and have been shaping the parties they now lead pretty much ever since. Their rise, one could argue, almost mirrors each other. Morrison took the reins after the Turnbull government found itself in turmoil, and Shorten rose to the leadership out of the Rudd-Gillard saga back in 2013. At the end of this campaign, one will be Prime Minister and the other's political career, well, it might just be over. Which way will this election swing? We can take a look at some key seats now. So as you can see over here, there's a state in particular that Shorten will need to conquer, and that is Queensland. There are 30 seats up for grabs. Liberals hold 21. 4 are in regional Queensland. For all 4 of these seats, the Adani coal mine looms as a very divisive issue. Scott Morrison hopes of holding and winning the seat of New South Wales is looking positive after the re-election, after the Berejiklian government. Tonight, keep a close eye on Liberal-held seats, in particular Banks and Reid. These seats were won by tight margins in 2016, and both look as though they may swing come the end of tonight. In the last election, Malcolm Turnbull did a great job at reducing Liberal losses in South Australia. 2 key seats include Boothby, the state's only marginal seat, and Sturt, which is held by the outgoing and ever-charismatic Christopher Pyne. Looking closely to where we are broadcasting right here in Victoria, the Prime Minister will be looking at 2 seats in particular, and that is Dunkley and Corangamite. Both are very nominal. Both are held by very nominal margins. In the last election, Chisholm was the only Liberal Party gain, but this time around it looks as though Labor is set to take the seat back. Down south in Tasmania, the Liberals won the seats of Bass and Brandon in 2013, but returned to Labor 3 years later. Tonight, the future of those seats, well, it is once again up in the air and anyone's guess. Finally, to our largest state where it's always sunny, in Western Australia, where the Liberals have done reasonably well in previous election 2 years ago. However, the housing market did collapse and there was a bit of a failing economy, and that cost the state Liberal government its election. This swing from the state towards red is likely to carry on into tonight. Seats to watch, keep an eye on, are Cowan, Pearce and Hasluck, because tonight they all could swing either way. Guys, it's back to you in the studio.
Thanks for that, Jesse. Looks like we've got quite a night ahead of us.
Yes, it certainly does. We're going to a quick break now, so stay tuned because we'll be crossing to the first reporters in the field when we return.
This is Election 2019, live from the studios of RMIT Melbourne, presented by The Junction. You're watching Election 2019, live from the studios of RMIT Melbourne, presented by The Junction.
Welcome back. You're watching Election 2019 presented by The Junction, coming to you live from the RMIT studios in Melbourne. We're going out live on Channel 31 here in Melbourne, Channel 44 in Adelaide, WTV in Perth, Facebook Live and community radio stations across the nation. Now I bet you're glad you stayed with us because we'll be McCrossin live to our reporter River McCrossin, who's camped out at the Liberal headquarters in Gilmore, New South Wales. River, what's the latest?
Well, so far, not much has happened, really. We've had a few people trickle in, mostly media, to be honest. It's 7 p.m. Warren Mundine is expected to arrive. So until then, in the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, we could see some more people start to trickle in.
River, what's the feel like in the room there?
Well, so far, there's a kind of reluctance to say how this might go, but it's early days. The votings have only just closed. And as the night progresses, we could see that mood change.
Now, River, you've been down at the booths in Gilmore speaking to people. What have you been picking up?
That's right. We've been down since about 9 a.m. in the morning, early days, and the issues on people's minds, climate change, jobs, and the cost of living, especially for retirees, because Gilmore has a growing retiree or aged population.
Thanks for that, River. It's been great talking to you.
And now we're going to take things back a little closer to home, so to speak, with Sarah Mead out in Chisholm here in Victoria. Now, Sarah, why have the candidates from the two major parties been using WeChat so much this election campaign?
Hi there. So almost 20% of the people here in Chisholm have Chinese ancestry. So it makes it easier for politicians and the parties to use WeChat as a platform to get across their audience. Now, WeChat has over 2 million users across Australia, and it is widely used amongst the Asian population.
So, Sarah, 5 of the 9 candidates in Chisholm are women. This includes both the Labor and Liberal Party candidates. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so in the history, we've seen Chisholm being ruled by female politicians the most for decades now. And the fact that 5 out of 9 candidates are female, it makes it look like a strong possibility that a female will win the seats as well.
So, Sarah, Deakin University's Birdwood campus sits in this electorate. What do students think are the most important issues facing Chisholm?
So younger students believe in climate change and environmental health, looking after the environment, as well as mental health, whereas young people like 25, 24, they're looking more into work-related issues. So taxes is one of their concerns.
Fantastic stuff there, Sarah. Thank you very much for joining us. You know, there's an interesting point about Chisholm, is that the former MP Julia Banks has actually retired from the Liberal government and gone independent, running against Greg Hunt for Flinders. What do you think is the significance of this, Mary?
I think this is very significant. Julia Banks was the only Liberal to win a seat in 2016 against the Labor Party. So she's seen as a bit of a hero in the Liberal Party, but she was very wounded during the internal battle to remove Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister. She alleged bullying within the caucus, within the party, and she decided that the party had changed so much in that short time that she would run as an independent. She would vacate Chisholm and she would take on Greg Hunt, Minister in the Morrison government, down in the seat of Flinders. So this is very significant for that seat. There's also been news that the Labor Party has claimed dirty tricks in Chisholm. So they've taken an injunction out with the Australian Electoral Commission complaining that there has been rorts in some of the information written in Mandarin by the Liberal Party trying to influence that very high Chinese vote, as we heard from our reporter there. So that's going to be a great seat to watch.
Sorry, I'm just...
I think it's going to be a really interesting seat, Ari. It's going to be important. Julia Banks is a great warrior. She could well unseat Greg Hunt, and Labor thinks that they can hold Chisholm.
So what does the political future look like for Greg Hunt if he is unseated tonight?
Well, it'd be the end of a political dynasty, actually. His father was a very significant minister in the state government. He was one of my predecessors as planning minister here in the state of Victoria. He was much admired, a very successful moderate Liberal. And of course, there are those people who think that in the Liberal Party they're pushing the moderates out, and more extreme right-wingers seem to be in control of the present Liberal Party. That's the view from some Liberal members. I think it would be a shame to lose the Hunt family from politics, but he certainly backed Dutton in that leadership coup which saw Morrison come up through the middle. So he was damaged in that in many people's eyes.
Thanks for that, Mary. Now we're going to take a quick look into the preferential voting system, thanks to our friends at the University of Melbourne.
Preference voting can be a pretty tricky thing. That's why I've come down to the Melbourne Exhibition Centre here in Southbank to ask early voters how much they really understand about the ballots they just cast. Do you understand anything about preference voting?
Not a huge deal at all.
Don't know much about it, but from the limited knowledge I gained in the last 6 months, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
I'm guessing here. I haven't really looked it up.
It's obviously a decision that we've made as a community that we want to make it complicated.
So, how does it work? To help visualize things, I went out to Woolies and bought 2 kilos of M&Ms. So let's take an imaginary seat in the House of Representatives and look at some first count votes. Labor is red, blue is for the Libs, the Greens are, well, green, the National Party is represented by the yellow M&Ms, and One Nation, they're the brown M&Ms. They'll hate that. After counting first preferences, Labor's in the lead with 35% of the vote. But because an absolute majority of 50% is needed, they haven't won yet. So we take the party with the fewest first preference votes and look at all the second preferences on their ballots. In this case, let's say One Nation splits that between the Libs and the Nationals. Then we redistribute. Still no 50%? That culling and recounting keeps going until one party is able to form an absolute majority and takes the seat. So what's the point? I asked Dr. Clayton Chin at the University of Melbourne to help me out.
The advantage of preference voting is the idea that it doesn't only ask a simple question of who you prefer the most, but what your relative feelings, or what your rank is amongst all the other existing parties. So it captures a much more nuanced sense of what an individual voter actually thinks. And that is thought to be, in at least on some accounts, more democratic.
A more informed voter is a better voter, and knowing where your vote goes and how it's counted is an important step to achieving that. Imran Arif, Melbourne, election 2019.
Well, that's very interesting insight. Next, we've got our reporter Jacinta Neal out in the New South Wales electorate of Reid. Jacinta, how's it going?
I'm going great tonight, thanks. How about you?
Yeah, not too bad. Now, Jacinta, Fiona Martin joined the campaign very late in comparison to Crosby. Do you think that this will affect the margin at all?
I think it will have an effect on the margin. Sam Crosby has been campaigning in Reid for over a year versus Fiona Martin, who only joined the campaign last month. So I think that people are more familiar with Crosby than they are with Martin in the area. So I definitely think that it could have an effect on the seats tonight.
Now, Banks and Reid both need to be won by Labor in order for Shorten to become Prime Minister. Do you think there's a chance there?
I definitely think that Shorten has a chance in this seat. This seat has attracted hot attention from both Liberal and Labor. Visits from former PMs Rudd and Howard, visits from Bill Shorten and Scott Morrison. I think that Scott Morrison and Bill Shorten are fighting really hard, and I think Shorten might have a chance tonight.
Jacinta, I understand that the economy is a major issue in this election, with over 26,500 small businesses up and running in Reid. Do you think this sentiment plays a major role with the voting?
I definitely think that this sentiment plays a major role. Fiona Martin has been backing the economy really strongly in Reid. She announced last week that she would be putting $3.6 million to women in business. She's a business owner herself, being a child psychologist. I think that people definitely identify with her small business values. I think that people definitely might be swung Liberal because of that small business emphasis.
Thanks for that, Jacinta. We're going to take a quick break now, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Jesse Burns in the green room.
This is Election 2019, live from the studios of RMIT Melbourne, presented by The Junction.
You're watching The Junction's live coverage of the 2019 federal election.
Welcome back to Election 2019, presented by The Junction, the only national election broadcast brought to you entirely by university students.
That's right, Rachel. You're with us live on Channel 31 in Melbourne, Channel 44 in Adelaide, WTV in Perth, Facebook Live and community radio stations across the country. We're going to jump straight back into the action now with our statsman Jesse Burns over in the green room, who's going to give us the take on the double dissolution from 2016. Jesse.
Yes, thanks guys. Well, yeah, I am the stats man. So let's take a look back at 2016. In 2016, the Turnbull government clawed its way back into office with 76 seats, a majority by just one seat. Not much of a majority if you ask me. Labor ended that election with 69 seats, but had gained a lot of ground, winning 14 seats from the coalition. 2016 also saw the highest ever percentage of primary votes given to minor parties at 23% compared to Labor's 35% and the Coalition's 42%. The Greens, the Xenophon team and the Cadres Australian Party all won single seats in the House of Reps. Now let's look at our Senate. It took vote counters 4 weeks to finalise the results, with a record 20 crossbenchers elected, along with 30 Coalition and 26 Labor members. But over the last 3 years, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the Parliament of Australia has changed quite dramatically. The political landscape today is quite different from the one Turnbull faced 3 years ago. By-election and seat reshuffling have changed the government's majority. There have been 9 elections since 2016, 7 the result of citizenship crises. Tim Hammond, member for Perth, resigned in May 2018 because of family reasons, and Malcolm Turnbull, as I'm sure you're aware, resigned in late August after he was dumped as the Liberal Party leader and indeed the Australian Prime Minister. Before tonight, the Coalition held 73 seats, with Shorten and his team nipping on Morrison's heels with 69. Due to the changes, though, in electoral boundaries and the lower house now has an extra seat. 2 were created, Fraser in Victoria and 1 in the ACT Bean, but 1 was also cut, the seat of Port Adelaide in South Australia. This means there are now 151 seats in the House of Reps and 77 seats are needed to win a majority in this government. Guys, it's back to you.
Thanks for that, Jesse. That was Jesse Burns there, bringing us up to speed on the need-to-knows of the election since 2016. We'll now cross live to Josie Douglas, who's in Cooper, formerly known as Batman. Josie, according to the public, what are the issues facing Cooper this election?
The big issue that's facing Cooper is climate change. We've asked a lot of people in the electorate, and they've said climate change is the biggest issue and what the government are doing about it. They've seen Labor's climate change policy and they like it, as well as the Greens, but the Liberal Party really hasn't spoken about climate change. So that's what they're feeling is the biggest issue.
And Josie, what are the chances of this being a marginal seat after the election?
It's going to be very interesting because this morning Richard Di Natale, the Greens leader, spoke about the seats that the Greens wanted to win. And Higgins, McNamara and Kooyong were mentioned, but Cooper wasn't. So we're going to see if they actually see themselves winning that. And Jed Carney has proven that she's a rising star of the Labor Party and she's really connected with voters, and a lot of voters we speak to really like her. So I feel like it does look like the Labor Party are going to win this seat.
And Josie, do you think the voters will be satisfied with the candidates in this election?
I think they are. I think David Riscombe, people were a bit quiet about him because they didn't know much about him. But as I said before, voters are really liking Jed Carney and they feel like she's really responding to their needs and their issues in the electorate of Cooper.
Thanks so much for your time there, Josie.
One of the most closely watched contests is taking place in Sydney's seat of Warringah, held by former Prime Minister Tony Abbott. Mr Abbott holds the seat with a margin of 11%, but faces strong challenge from former Olympian Zali Steggall. Meg Konofsky from the UTS filed this report.
The Warringah electorate is home to sand, surf, exclusive boutiques and almost 150,000 residents. Some will be seeking a new representative voice.
Thank you.
Make the vote. There you go.
While others search for stability. Climate change has been a contentious issue for voters.
Actually, it takes the focus away from problems that could be solved and aren't being solved.
Clearly there is an issue there, but should it be part of an electoral campaign? It should just be part of life that we're trying to save the planet.
The reality is the IPCC stated that if we reduce by 45% by 2030 on 2005 levels, we would have a 50-50 chance of remaining at 1.5 degrees of global warming.
One issue the candidates can agree on is the potential for the Northern Beaches Tunnel to solve local congestion and get locals moving on the roads. Different polls have given contrasting projections for results in this seat, but despite facing his smallest margin in years, Tony Abbott is confident voters will trust in his political experience.
Look, I've never taken this seat for granted. I've never been complacent, but I'm quietly confident. I think I've never had more enthusiasm and never had more energy for the job, and I hope that once more the people of Warringah will put their trust in me.
And how do you explain the momentum behind Zali Euston's campaign?
Well, let's see just how much momentum there turns out to be.
Will Tony Abbott and the Liberal Party's decades-long grip on Warringah be broken by a candidate with no political experience?
Only time will tell. Then you guys will all be able to say, oh, what a waste of money.
Meg Konofsky, The Junction.
That was great coverage. Mary, would you like to add in on that?
Well, it's going to be an interesting election. If Tony Abbott does lose that seat of Warringah, it truly is a change of the guard, because if Tony loses that seat and an independent takes it from him, you'll have Tony Abbott leaving the parliament. You've had Julie Bishop leaving the parliament, who was deputy leader. There's a big risk with Barnaby Joyce, who was deputy leader of the country, head of the Nationals. And of course, you've got Christopher Pyne, who was leader in the House for the Liberals, who's left the parliament. So there's big changes. It's physically going to look very, very different.
Thanks for that, Mary. Right now, we're crossing to Braden Jason, who's coming to us from our government's Home Affairs Minister, Peter Dutton's seat of Dickson, up in the Sunshine Coast. Now, Braden, Dickson has been a hotly contested seat in past election. How is this year stacking up?
Today is definitely living up to expectations. It's gearing up to be a close race between the 18-year member for Dickson, Peter Dutton, and his competitor, Ali France from Labor. I can tell you that Labor needs a 1.7% swing to overthrow Mr Dutton, who is clearly a scalp that Labor wants to take. But at the moment, it's too close to call, so we'll fill you in with how the night unfolds.
Braden, can you tell us a little about the electorate?
Yeah, the seat of Dickson is situated to the northwest of Greater Brisbane. The Adam metropolitan area is majoritively residential and houses both the Brisbane and Moreton Bay regional councils. Some suburbs to note include Edens Hill, home to the iconic music venue, and also Strathpine, home to both Strathpine Shopping Centre and also Peter Dutton's office, which is behind me. Peter Dutton's office was infamously vandalised back in 2018 during his failed prime ministership attempt. This is obviously not the first time Dickson has been in the national spotlight, and it will continue to do so as the night goes on.
Now, Braden, Peter Dutton has held the seat for many years. Do you think it's likely he's going to regain his seat tonight?
Peter Dutton has held his seat for Dickson since 2001, and during that time he has been both the Immigration Minister and also, in more recent times, the Minister of Home Affairs. I can tell you that the people of Dickson clearly love their member, which is why they're voting him in time and time again. But also, as I mentioned before, Labor is out for Mr Dutton, and this seat will help them gain the majority of the coalition. But obviously at the moment it's too close to call, so we'll keep you up to date from Dickson.
So what has the vibe been like amongst voters at Dickson booths today?
Well, not even the rain today in Dickson could cut through the tension at voting booths. In talking to a multitude of voters and volunteers, only one brave Greens member would speak to us. This just shows how close the race is going to be between the two major parties, and it could come down to minor party preferences such as the Greens to decide who will become the coalition.
Fantastic stuff there, Braden. Keep up that good work.
We have one more interstate trip to make before our break. We've got Kelly Royal in the electorate of Sydney. What's the atmosphere like where you are?
Well, we're outside here at Alexandria Erskineville Bowling Club where the Labor Party are having their volunteers party this evening. Now, we are starting to see people come in straight from the polls donning their purple Tanya Plibersek shirts, and now they'd be looking for two outcomes this evening. Now, the first one, of course, is for Tanya to regain her seat in the election of Sydney where we are. And the second one would be for Labor to win the election and become the governing party of Australia. Now, for Tanya's seat, that is looking very safe at the current time. Even before polls opened today, she held in the two-party preference in the last election. She held it by a 15.3% margin, which is huge. As for Labor taking the government, now that is closer. Our last news poll showed Labor ahead 51.5 to 48.5%. So that one's looking to be a tighter race, and hopefully we will hear from that tonight in terms of pre-polling, and that may extend it a little bit.
And how do you think things are shaping up for Tanya Plibersek?
Well, Tanya Plibersek has held the seat since 1998, and before that it was considered a safe Labor seat as well. So it is looking good for her. Interestingly enough, the two following parties, the Liberals and the Greens, both put candidates in their late 20s, which is quite young. They may be trying to connect more to the demographic with the median age of the Sydney electorate, 32 years old. So they're potentially trying to connect to that. Now, as I said, Tanya is extremely popular. On primary votes alone, she had the last election by almost 43%, which is huge. But also she'd be looking to take on further roles if Labor were to win government. Now, she's currently Shadow Minister for Education and Training and the Shadow Minister for Women. So it would be suspected that she would move on and become the minister in those areas. And now she's currently also the Deputy Opposition Leader. The natural progression there would be to become the Deputy Prime Minister, which would be very exciting. Now, in terms of whether the top job, if Labor does win this, it is very unlikely that we'd be looking at a leadership change in the near future because of the rules that Labor put in during the Rudd government, meaning that it's much harder to topple a leader. It would need to be 75% of party votes to change the leaderships. But if they do lose and they remain in opposition, that does drop down to 60%. So it could be possible that we might see a leadership change then. But whether Tanya would chuck her hat in the ring for that, we couldn't really say. We did just see a leadership change in the Labor Party on the state election after a loss. So we'd have to wait and see what happens from there.
Thank you for your time, Kelly. We're going on to a brief break now, but don't go anywhere because we've got some exciting electorate coverage coming up after the break.
This is Election 2019 with nationwide coverage from journalism students from across Australia.
This is Election 2019, live from the studios of RMIT Melbourne, presented by The Junction.
Welcome back. You're watching Election 2019 presented by The Junction. Now, if you're watching us on your screen, that means you're tuning in to Channel 31 in Melbourne, Channel 44 in Adelaide, WTV in Perth, Facebook Live, or maybe you're listening to us on community radio wherever you are in the country. We've had some pretty great people on the show so far, but the best is yet to come, Ari.
It surely is. We've got Lachlan Gray now at the heart of Tony Abbott's electorate of Warringah. How's it looking for us out there, Lachlan?
Well, Ari, it's certainly contentious out here. I've been walking around the electorate the past couple of weeks and indeed today, and there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of support for both Tony Abbott and his main, the candidate who could take his job, independent Zali Steggall.
Well, Lachlan, apart from Tony himself, who are the main contenders in this electorate?
Well, like I said, Rachel, independent candidate Zali Steggall, ex-Olympic skier, is probably the main opposition that Tony Abbott is facing. But we also have a Labor candidate, Dean Harris, who's been campaigning a lot. And then we've got independents such as Susan Mullen-Coons, Palmer United, Fraser Anning, and of course the Greens.
Why is this a significant election for Warringah?
This is a significant election for Warringah because Warringah is a seat that's actually voted Conservative before the Liberal Party even existed. And since the Liberal Party has existed, they voted them in every single time. And Tony Abbott he's famously a Conservative firebrand. He's held the seat for the past 25 years. So this will be the first time in the seat's history that it goes to a non-Conservative candidate.
And what have been the main issues of this campaign that you're seeing?
Well, the main issue here is climate change. Famously, Tony Abbott doesn't think much of the the movement for action on climate change. Zali Steggall is actually more progressive, you would say, on the issue than the Labor opposition. She's moving very hard in the climate change area, and that's something that locals here care a lot about.
Yes, thanks for that, Lachlan. Well, it sounds like Tony may have a bit of a fight on his hands tonight. Thanks for that.
Now, Paul, I wanted to ask you, what do you think Abbott's loss would symbolise, given that he's become the visible face of the Liberal Party's Conservative faction?
I think it would be a very important moment, particularly if the Liberal Party then loses government tonight, because we can expect that there will be a period of intense soul-searching within the Liberal Party and quite likely something of a conflict between the different ideological elements within that party, and the loss of Abbott as a very high-profile social conservative in the party, and potentially the fact that what this symbolises in terms of a seat like Warringah. These are inner-urban, blue-chip Liberal seats. I think it's the second most affluent seat in Australia. But if those seats are now turning against the Liberal Party, and we might also see this replicated in places like Higgins and Kooyong, and we'll watch the swings there, a gulf between its constituencies. We heard a lot in the past about Labor's problems in balancing the outer suburbs and the inner city, where the Greens have been challenging Labor. But that problem is now being mirrored, I think, for the Liberal Party. So the question is, which way does it head? My answer was it has to head back into the centre, because the centre is where Australian politics has always fought and won. And the key question for the Liberal Party, possibly out of tonight, will be, have they shifted too far to the Conservative edge, and what do they do now? Because another element of this, they're also losing a lot of progressive members, have actually gone even before tonight's campaign. So I think we're going to go through an intense period of soul-searching and potential inner conflict in the Liberal Party about deciding what sort of party they want to be and how they balance, as they've always had to balance, those conservative and liberal impulses.
I think there'll be blood on the floor if they lose in the Liberal Party. I think it'll be very, very nasty. As you've described, Paul, there's been a battle for the soul of the modern Liberal Party, and they've moved very far to the right. It has been said. And that was the battle between the Abbott and the Turnbull forces. What is the soul of the Liberal Party? Is it in the centre or is it on the right? And I think if the party loses tonight and loses badly and loses those key blue chip seats that you've just mentioned, I think Tony Abbott will be lined up by a lot of moderates and said, you're responsible. And you know, 25 years, a quarter of a century, he's been representing this particular electorate. And his views on climate change have flip-flopped all over the place. But I think he's missed the zeitgeist. He missed it on same-sex marriage. He certainly missed it on women, and women are going to play a really important role in this election in some of those key marginal seats. And he's missed it, in the view of many Liberals, on climate change. It's going to be fascinating to see if Zali Steggall can make that big change.
Thanks so much for that, Mary and Paul. Now, we're going to the New South Wales coast now, where healthcare is one of the key issues in the seat of Gilmore. Both the Prime Minister and the opposition leader have announced increased health spending in the electorate. Patrick Bell from the University of Wollongong is from Nowra.
It seems one issue this election has caught plenty of voters' attention in the ultra-marginal seat of Gilmore.
Hello, Fiona.
The parties know it as well. Opposition leader Bill Shorten used a visit to Nowra to announce $250 million to reduce waiting times and improve follow-up treatments, a visit welcomed by Labor's candidate in the seat, Fiona Phillips.
And I've lost count of the amount of people that I've met that have been waiting sometimes for a couple of years for elective surgery.
We need to give patients options to be treated closer to home in these super clinics rather than all just being admitted into hospital.
The visit came just 3 days after the Prime Minister pledged $128 million for the nearby Shellharbour Hospital. Liberal candidate Warren Mundine has been talking up his side's track record on health spending.
The coalition government's been pumping a lot of money into health. It's been a record amounts of money. You're looking at the record amounts also for the PBS.
The health of the nation is always a big issue, and it seems like both major parties are making a play for people's votes on that very issue right here in Gilmore.
The only question left, of course, is which side wins more votes. Patrick Bell in Gilmore for election 2019.
Now from La Trobe University in Melbourne, we have Cody Matheson-Lowe reporting live from the electorate of La Trobe. And Cody, what does the Labor Party actually promise for the district this election?
Hey guys, so the Labor Party has promised a better education system out here in the La Trobe electorate. So we're up here at Pakenham Secondary College, and it's interesting to note that this place does seem to need a bit of an update. And in the more upscale areas such as Pakenham and Berwick is the same, but also pushing out towards the more regional areas of this electorate, such as Jambrook, which moves closer towards the South Gippsland area.
Now, Cody, apart from the two major parties, which independents have been running, and what does that say about the area?
It's interesting to note that there are three very conservative independent parties out here that didn't run last election. So that would be the Pauline Hanson's One Nation. That would also be the United Australia Party and Rise Up Australia. So it'd be interesting to see how that affects the voting. Now, the Liberals are expected to win by about 1.8% from Newspoll. So it does leave a bit of room for Labor to win.
Thank you, Cody. Don't forget to stay warm out there.
Will do.
Now we're going out to our friends in Adelaide. Now we have Nick McGrath with the latest from Boothby, where there seems to have been persistent rumours of a swing to Labor. What's the likelihood of that coming to fruition, Nick?
Yeah, good evening, Rachel. It looks as though it's potentially not on as much as we thought it was even a week or so ago. On Tuesday, our prominent paper here in South Australia, The Advertiser, released a poll in Boothby indicating the sitting member for Liberal, Nicole Flint, was up, her primary vote was up about 6 percentage points on 2016 when she won. And if that comes to fruition, I do not think Boothby will change hands tonight.
In 2016, nearly 20% of the votes went to the Xenophon candidate. Is there any idea how these votes are going to go now that there's no one running under that banner?
Yeah, look, Ari, it is a bit speculative at this point because, as you pointed out earlier in the broadcast, polls have literally only closed here about 15, 20 minutes ago. But we've had a really strong independent in this seat called Trevor Jones, and he is really strongly looking at getting that 20% of the vote. Whether or not that occurs, we'll have to wait and see. I think based on the pre-polling, what's more likely to happen is it'll be relatively evenly distributed between the Liberal and the Labor Party and potentially might not have as much of an effect as we previously might have thought in Boothby.
Now, the pre-election polling had Boothby as one of the closest in the country. Can we expect the preferencing to decide the seat?
Yeah, look, Rachel, you're spot on there. I think the Labor Party targeted this as probably their most likely gain in South Australia. However, as I said before, the change in sort of the flow of the votes in the last few days suggests that the Liberals may have a safer hold than we previously expected. So on that grounds, probably not. However, what we can tell you is, as it looks nationally, it looks like the Palm United Party won't have much of a say. So whether the other preferences do or not, that's a wait and see. But as we said, it looks as though a safe but small Liberal hold here.
Good on you, Nick. Thanks for that. It's time to take another short break for us, but we'll be bringing you back the news straight from the electorate and visit Jesse in the green room again. Don't go anywhere.
This is Election 2019, with nationwide coverage from journalism students from across Australia.
You're watching Election 2019, presented by The Junction.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're turning into Election 2019. Coming to you from the RMIT studios in Melbourne across Channel 31, Channel 44 in Adelaide, WTV in Perth, Facebook Live and community radio stations across Australia. We're going to cross the reins over to Jesse Burns in the green room, who's going to give us a closer look at some of the interesting trends between climate change and immigration over the last few years. Jesse.
Yes, thanks guys. Well, we thought we'd take you a bit of around Australia, looking at Twitter and trends and Google Trends as well. So here we have it, is one of the first tweets this week, obviously, the sad passing of Bob Hawke, and Tony Abbott, well, he thought he might piggyback off that to the distaste of some people around Australia, making their voices known. To our next tweet that we've brought up that's been trending. Obviously, a key issue in this election is climate change, as you had previously mentioned, and lots of people around Australia calling for action, particularly in Queensland. To our next slide, or our next tweet rather, democracy sausage. Well, Australians, they do like their snags, be it halal, vegan, whatever it may be. Today, Australians all around Australia are getting their snags, and this is the second most trending topic in Australia. Would you believe it? Yes, I guess I would. To a really big battle shaping up tonight, and that is with Tony Abbott and Zali. You can see over here, this is the trend. So this is a Google trend, so this shows what people are searching. So if people are searching Tony Abbott into their Google engine, it will spike. So you can see over here that Tony Abbott has spiked recently in the last couple of days, and that is probably due to his statement. People obviously not too happy about it, or they just want to find out. So that's showing that. But you can see Zali's that she's had a little bit of a rise down here, sort of bringing her back up even par with Tony Abbott. A really good indicator of where people's interest lies. Looking at another slide now, you can see over here, so in our yellow line we have immigration, and in our blue line we have climate. At the last election, this is around the last election, you can see climate was a really big issue. Probably the election before, as you might remember, that Tony Abbott was talking a lot about boat people and that sort of rhetoric. So it was a big issue last election, but it's slowly dipped. And as you can see, climate change has started to reach about the same level of interest in Australia. And there's one particular peak that's worth looking at, and that's this one here. Obviously, the Adani mine has been a very big issue in this election, and it will swing voters either way. It's a divisive issue. But guys, for now, it's back to you in the studio.
Thank you for that fascinating parallel there, Jesse. Well, it's almost the top of the hour and we're dying to know what you think of the night so far. Mary, have your predictions shifted at all in the last hour?
No, they haven't shifted. It's so early. I think it's about 2% of the count in some booths, and of course Western Australia is still voting. But it's interesting. I mean, these are just little vignettes that are popping up. It seems that Kevin Andrews in Menzies here in outer Melbourne is facing quite a big swing against him. He's one of the senior, long-serving Liberal ministers. And of course, he's been in the parliament a very, very long time. He's on the right wing of the Liberal Party. And if this swing means anything, which of course it doesn't so early, it could be an indicator. But I'm not betting the house on that just yet.
Well, we'll be interested to see how this one plays out. We're now going to chat with Kate Purnell from Edith Cowan University, who's camped out in Hasluck for the evening. I'm intrigued, Kate. What events have led to the small margin of the 2.1% between these two big parties?
Right, well, in the electorate of Hasluck, since Ken Wyatt, the Liberal MP who currently holds the seat, he gained it in 2010, it has always been a very tight margin. In 2010, it was just by 1.4%, and then it has just fluctuated. It went to 6% in the last federal election, the 2013 federal election, and then by 2016, the Labor Party got a 4% swing, and it brought it down to 2.1%, which is what the current margin is.
So what have been the prominent issues for Hasluck this election?
Well, there has been a lot talked about employment. The unemployment rate, I should say, in Hasluck is above the national average. That has been a big issue with voters. Education has been a prominent one, and aged care, as there is a significant ageing population over 65 in the Hasluck electorate, and that is Ken Wyatt's portfolio. It is the aged care.
And why has Ken Wyatt been a significant MP?
Well, he in 2015 became the first Indigenous MP. So he's had a very big presence and has represented the Hasluck electorate on the big scale. People here, from speaking to them, have been very fond of Ken Wyatt. And when discussing who they are planning on voting for, even though they are disgruntled with the Liberal Party and what has been going on in Canberra, they are very fond of Ken Wyatt, and doing so, they are still prepared to vote for him based on what he gives back to the community.
Now, Kate, what has James Martin's campaign looked like? Has it appealed to the voters?
Yes, well, the one thing James Martin has, he wasn't meant to be the first candidate. They did change it over. and from changing over, he had a little bit less time to campaign and get people on board. However, he has been promoting very similar issues to what happened in the last federal election, what Labor pushed for, which got them the 4% swing. So people have been on board with what he's saying, and he only has to get just over 2.1% margin to be able to take the seat. So tonight it will be a close one to watch to see who takes it.
Thanks for joining us, Kate, out at Edith Cowan University. Moving back within borders, Victorian borders, we've got Alex Blaine over there at Corangamite, the most marginal key seat in the country. So what is the significance of this election?
Well, Ari, as you said, this is the most marginal seat in the country. That was after Sarah Henderson's already slim margin of 3% from the last election was gutted by federal redistributions, meaning the margin is now only 0.03%, or just 300 votes. Another interesting fact is that since 1996, the party that has won Corangamite has gone on to win the federal election.
So with the seat hanging in the balance, what are the Liberals doing to retain the seat?
The Liberals have put a lot of resources into retaining Corangamite. Sarah Henderson has made 41 campaign promises to the tune of $3 billion. That's $26,500 per voter in Corangamite. They have also, they've been sandbagging massively here.
What are Labor's chances of winning the seat?
Well, Labor will be feeling very confident going into this, thanks to a lot of things going their way. Just last night, Damien Cole, an independent candidate, changed his preferences from a split vote to Labor. Libby Coker was also nicely put second on the ballot, whereas Sarah Henderson was put lower in the ballot. Libby Coker has also been canvassing just as much locally as Sarah Henderson. She's made 14 promises with about $34 million, half of which is going to redeveloping Torquay Hospital.
So what would you say are some of the biggest issues concerning voters in Corangamite, Alex?
Well, there's a lot of issues such as fracking and the sacking of Malcolm Turnbull. That was a big issue that could have caused a swing against the Liberals. However, the race has tightened in recent days, and the environment has been another big issue, with both the Greens candidate Southern Northeast and Damien Cole running on climate campaigns, and Libby Coker and Sarah Henderson clashing at a recent event in Torquay.
Thanks for joining us, Alex. We'll finish off our triple live cross spree with Joseph Olbrich Palmer over in Western Sydney. Joseph, how have the people of Lindsay voted in the past?
Well, it's a highly marginal seat. So basically you're looking at two different candidates. Basically you're looking at party candidates winning multiple consecutive terms. But it's a really difficult seat. Traditionally, the ruling party has won Lindsay, and that did change in 2016, though, when Emma Husar was elected to the lower house. Both major parties are grappling with community fallout. Last year, Emma Husar, the incumbent, or rather outgoing Labor MP, she was dogged by allegations of misconduct. Now, that is being reviewed before a court, but most of it was proved to be false. However, Diane Beamer, the current Labor candidate, she did win that pre-selection. So, similarly, the Liberal Party, they did take a hit as well in Lindsay with the leadership spill last year. It saw Malcolm Turnbull lose the prime ministership. Basically, as you know, the leadership spill saw support for the coalition drop nationally, but that was certainly concentrated in marginal seats like Lindsay.
Now, Joseph, what are some of the main issues for the area of Lindsay?
So Nepean Hospital is probably the biggest issue. Labor leader Bill Shorten was just joined, or rather he came out and visited the electorate to prop up support with Diane Beamer. During that visit, he pledged $125 million to the Nepean Hospital Cancer Centre. Now, that was a big moment for Diane Beamer because back 22 years ago, when she was in state politics, she was actually instrumental in getting the cancer centre up and running in the first place. Hopping over to the Liberals, though, Melissa McIntosh, the Liberal candidate, who she has a background in affordable housing and homelessness advocacy. So it was a great thing for her when Prime Minister Scott Morrison dropped into Caddens, a part of the Lindsay electorate, to announce the first home loan deposit scheme, which basically gives first home buyers the opportunity to get into the housing market by making a deposit of as little as 5% on a home loan. Another massive issue is Western Sydney Airport. So the government, it's received bipartisan support, but the government committed $5.3 billion in equity to fully fund the development of the airport. It's looking at 28,000 direct jobs as well as about 18,000 indirect jobs. But Labor is hoping to push that indirect number higher, preferably by, through infrastructure such as public transport, train lines and whatnot.
Thanks for that, Joseph. Now, Paul, given that Lindsay has a history of being a bellwether seat in Sydney's western suburbs and its related history of volatility, do you think the Liberals are targeting it in the hope that it could offset the losses somewhere else?
Certainly, it's been one of the ones that the Liberal Party believes it could claim because of the problems that have occurred for the Labor Party, what happened to Emma Husser, the loss of incumbency. And we should always remember that incumbency is a very powerful thing, and therefore her having to retire from the seat has left it vulnerable for the Liberal Party. And it has looked across Australia to see where it might find potentially a handful of seats. We've repeatedly heard that there's a very narrow path back to government for the coalition, seats here and there, perhaps the most marginal seat in northern Queensland based on Townsville, Herbert, for example, but another seat like Lindsay, seats in Tasmania potentially. And so they have certainly focused intently on claiming it back, and they've been quite confident in the past week or so that it's within their grasp. So it's certainly one to keep a close eye on tonight.
It's interesting that we're getting some movement out of Queensland. I think we said at the beginning, Ari and Rachel, that Queensland was going to be significant in this election. They've certainly held in Groom. That's been held by the Liberal Nationals. Their vote has increased by 7%. Now that's a very strong showing for the LNP. In Farrer, which is down on the Murray, and that's of course the issue of water and lack of water and dead fish, which you might remember. Susan Lee, who has 20 years in the Parliament, she was looking a little bit shaky against an independent. She has had so far a swing of 10% against her, but that's nowhere near enough for her to lose the seat. And also in Queensland, the Katter Party has held Kennedy. So the Conservatives are doing very well in Queensland so far.
Thanks for chiming in on those, guys. We're now going to go to the heart of Melbourne, where Fatima Haloum is going to give us the latest from the Greens' stronghold. Helena, both of the candidates from the Labor's Clive Palmer were forced out in the last 2 weeks of the campaign over comments that they have made on social media and elsewhere. How likely is it that this will affect the result?
Yeah, so the seat of Melbourne has always, for the past 9 years, been a strong and safe Green seat. The election is going to be very much driven by climate change, and Adam Bant, so the Greens candidate, has been a big advocate for it, as was Luke Creasy, the Labor candidate, and he was forced out of the race due to comments he made on his social media. And the other candidates running as well won't really pose a threat to Adam Bant or the seat of Melbourne, because they joined the race quite late and they've been running really low-key campaigns. So Adam Bant is most likely going to be re-elected into the seat of Melbourne. 1.6% of votes have been counted, and he does hold most of those at the moment. I believe it's over 50% so far. So yeah, that's what's been happening here.
So Melbourne is a seat held by Labor since its inception. That was until Adam Bant won it and secured the Greens' first and still their only lower house seat in 2010. Now, how important is that seat to the Greens, given that voice it gives the party in the House of Representatives in what is a very tight parliament?
Yeah, so previously the Greens only held one seat in the lower house, and that was Melbourne. But polls suggest that there could be an outside chance of 2 other electorates, and that would be huge for the Greens because that would then match their voice in the Senate. So it is important that they maintain this seat, and if it is a very close election, we are expecting the Greens to hold some power and to leverage over the elected government to push policies like climate change. And yeah.
Thank you for your time, Helene. We're going to give you the next 2 minutes of ad breaks, but don't worry, we'll be right back.
You're watching Election 2019, presented by The Junction.
This is Election 2019, live from the studios of RMIT Melbourne, presented by The Junction.
Welcome back. You're tuning to Election 2019, presented by The Junction. Now, we've had some breaking news for the seats of Queensland, and we'll throw to Mary Delahunty. Mary, what's the latest?
Well, it seems that Queensland is holding for the Liberal National Party. Indeed, we've already mentioned Groom with a 7% increase on 2016. Maranoa is also being held by the Liberal National Party, Wide Bay, and also the seat of Wright, with a 4% swing to the Liberal National Party. In Wide Bay, 5.5% swing. Now, this might sound alarming. It's probably a correction, because you might recall that in 2016, Queensland swung violently against the Liberal National Party. They didn't like Malcolm Turnbull as leader, and they preferred someone like Dutton in Dixon. So this could well be a correction. This would be what Labor is expecting, but we wouldn't want to see those sort of swings around the rest of the country. It's interesting that Tasmania, the seat of Lyons, has been retained by the ALP. Now, Tasmania would be seen to be quite strong for Labor. I don't know that the Liberal National Party would expect to win any seats in Tasmania, although they've campaigned there very strongly.
Now, Mary, talking about Queensland, have we had some word about how things are stacking up for One Nation? We know they are essentially a Queensland-centred party, and Clive Palmer himself has poured an enormous amount into the advertising. So is there been some updates on how things are shaping up for them?
No, we haven't. I haven't got any information on that at this stage. Certainly their preferences would be from One Nation would be helping the Liberal National Party retain those seats that I've just mentioned. The Clive Palmer party has spent an enormous amount of money. I think it's around about $70 million. Instead of paying his workers entitlements at the nickel mine in Queensland, he's chosen to spend the $70 million on advertising. I think it'll be interesting to see if you can buy a seat in the Parliament.
Thanks so much for that, Mary. Now, we're glad that you've stuck with us, because we've got Sarah Booth live from Menzies. And Sarah, what's the atmosphere been like down there today?
Hi, Rachel. It's been a pretty positive atmosphere down here in Menzies today. I spoke to the Liberal candidate Kevin Andrews earlier, and he said that there'd been no hostility today. And speaking to volunteers, they were all, they said that voters had been receptive towards them. And when I spoke to Stella Yee, the Labor candidate, while she wouldn't say whether she thought she would win or not, she did say that she doesn't think Menzies will ever be taken for granted again.
And what are some of the key issues facing Menzies this election?
Well, Doncaster, one of the suburbs in Menzies, does not have a train station, and this comes up quite a lot. So there's been promises by both major parties about public transports and roads. We saw Labor, which has pledged money for the suburban rail loop, which could potentially include a Doncaster railway station, whereas Liberals have promised funding to upgrade one of the key roads in the areas. But moving away from the policy level, there's also been discussion around the Liberal candidate, Kevin Andrews. Get Up has been running a campaign, Vote Out the Far Right, against Mr Andrews. Kevin Andrews supported Peter Dutton in the Leadership Libs bill, and he campaigned for the no side in the same-sex marriage plebiscite. So there has been some campaigning in the area saying that he doesn't represent the views of the people of Menzies.
Now, Sarah, the boundaries for Menzies have changed since the last election. How likely is this to impact the results today?
Correct. The boundaries have changed. Where I'm standing here in Eltham right now actually used to be part of the electorate of Jagga. So this area, unlike the other areas in Menzies, is much more pro-Labor. This polling booth that I'm at right now actually voted 53% in Labor's favour in the last election. So adding these regions to Menzies will have a bit of an impact, but not too much. ABC calculates that the Liberal margin with these new seats factored in would slip from 10.6% to 7.8%. So it won't impact the results enough to change who wins the seat. There would still need to be people changing who they voted for last time in order for us to see any impact.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Sarah. Staying in Victoria now, we cross to Brodie Everest from the University of Melbourne. Brodie, what's the situation so far?
Well, here I am in Young Street, in the heart of Frankston, and Frankston really is the heart of Dunkley. At the moment, with 3.7% of the vote counted, Peter Murphy, the Labor candidate, is ahead of Chris Kruger, the Liberal candidate. We've been out at polling stations today talking to volunteers and voters, and one of the big messages is it has been very quiet. Clearly, a lot of people have been voting at the pre-polling centres. Also, Darren Hinch actually visited a polling station in Langwarrin today as well, which is quite interesting.
Now, Brodie, how has this differed from the last election?
Well, the big difference is a redistribution. In 2018, the AEC changed the boundaries for Dunkley, adding the northern suburbs of Carrum and Skye and removing the southern end, the Mornington end of Dunkley, meaning that it is now a notional Labor seat, whereas previously it was a notional Liberal seat and was held by the Liberals since 1996.
And what campaign policies have really resonated with the voters in Dunkley?
Well, it's hard to say. We've had a variety of responses when we've been talking to voters yesterday and today. There have been some big ticket items like the environment, like climate change and the economy, but there have also been some local issues such as health and aged care. Here in Dunkley, there are 2 major hospitals and there's a lot of care facilities and a lot of people work in those areas. So health is really an area that people have talked about, and it's an area that affects people directly here in Dunkley.
Now, how much of an impact have the minor parties made?
Well, it's difficult to say, but they've certainly been active here in Dunkley. Again, as Darren Hinch has been here, we've been seeing Hinch Party volunteers, and we've been seeing United Australia Party volunteers as well. Darren Hinch has preferenced the Labor Party, but the United Australia Party has preferenced the Liberals. So, look, they really could have an impact in this seat.
Thanks for that info, Brodie. We're going to jump across in a few states and have a chat with Tilly Hannett out in Moncrief, Queensland. Tilly, who's the fan favourite candidate over there?
Hi guys, I am here from the Bowls Club in Broadbeach, where Angie Bell here for the Liberal National Party of Moncrief Gold Coast will be celebrating hopefully her win. Angie, how much preparation goes into an election like this?
An enormous amount of preparation, Tilly. There are hundreds and hundreds of volunteers who give their time to make sure that all of the polling booths are manned, that the candidates looked after, and that people know how to vote.
Yep, and how confident are you in this election?
Oh, look, there's no such thing as a safe seat anymore, Tilly, but I guess the margin here historically is quite large.
Yeah. Angie is currently sitting at around 62% with her votes, and the candidate and the electorate from Moncrief has held the seat since 1984.
Are there any big issues for the area?
One of the major issues would be the extension of the light rail, which they want to extend from Broadbeach to Burleigh Heads. Angie, you're a big supporter of this, aren't you?
Absolutely. To be a global city and globally competitive, we need to make sure that there's connectivity to the airport via light rail, absolutely.
Thanks wonderful stuff there, Tilly. Now we're going to throw to our panellist, Mary, who's had some breaking news.
Well, we've just seen that they're calling Corangamite, which we had that wonderful live cross earlier, which is a bellwether state and very, very marginal. They're now calling that for Labor. So it appears that Liberal Sarah Henderson has lost the seat of Corangamite. There's been a swing of 7.8% towards Labor in that seat. So what we're seeing with quite a few seats counted is Queensland's holding for the LNP, and Victoria seems to be even increasing its swing towards Labor. Very significant.
I think It's very early to say this, but this election looks like, again, a very stratified result in terms of what's happening in Victoria. As we said right at the beginning of the coverage, if Labor's to win tonight, Victoria was to be the bedrock. That's panning out. But I think Labor would be very concerned about what's going on in Queensland and in New South Wales. At the moment, it doesn't look like the swing's on. You know, this election might come down to Western Australia, the way things are panning out. Very early to tell, but as I said, there look like there's significant disparities opening up in terms of a swing. In fact, some of the figures, there's a swing to the coalition in Queensland. So...
and the National Party's holding their seats so far. They're holding the seat of Riverina and Page. There was some concern that water would be a big issue in some of those seats, but it looks as though they're holding at the moment. It's a fascinating election.
Taking it back to the Victorian turf now, we have Daria Impombato out in Macnamara, a key marginal seat in Melbourne's inner east. Now, Daria, I hear there's a three-corner contest where second preferences will be fundamental. Daria, what are the deals?
Yeah, so here in Macnamara, it seems like the Greens have gained a lot of support. Given that their voters are most likely to give their preferences to Labor, it is going to be very hard for Labor candidate Ashma to win unless she wins at the first preference stage.
So was climate change a big topic in the electorate during this campaign?
Absolutely. Just last month here at the St Kilda Town Hall, some environmental groups held a climate change forum, which was attended by a very vocal crowd of almost 700 people. And it seemed like the environmental policies advanced by Burns and Hodgins-May were more resonant with the crowd compared to those by Ashmore.
Now, the Liberal candidate Ashmora has been at the centre of many controversies. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, so she was caught up in many controversies over the campaign, but she refused to comment multiple times. The Junction has tried to contact her for an interview, but she has always declined.
Thank you, Daria. Sounds like it could be a heated battle over there. It's time now to go to a commercial break, but stay tuned because we'll be back in more election coverage here at Election 2019.
You're watching The Junction's live coverage of the 2019 federal election. You're watching Election 2019, live from the studios of RMIT Melbourne, presented by The Junction.
Welcome back, and now we're coming to you live from the studios of RMIT in Melbourne. We're going out on Channel 31 here in Melbourne, Channel 44 in Adelaide, WTV in Perth, Facebook Live and community radio stations across the country. The next seat we'll be having a look at is the independent seat of Indi, where we have Ashley Gillen with boots on the ground. Now, this north-east Victorian seat was Conservative until independent Cathy McGowan was defeated by Liberal Sophie Mirabella in 2013. So what's changed?
Well, what's changed is I think this electorate in 2013 got a bit, was considered such a safe Liberal seat that there was a lot of pressure and she lost the election, and then people wanted to see an independent get in because it seemed that community concerns from the Indi, which stretches all the way from Wodonga to Kinglake, it's a very large electorate, a lot of the community's concerns were just being ignored as it was considered a safe Liberal seat.
And do you think the seat will continue to be independent?
I think it will. I mean, I'm at Helen's thing here in Wangaratta, and there's quite a lot of volunteers here, and at the moment whilst there's been a 7% swing to the Labor Party on last count, Helen is still seems like still, as I'm looking at the board, is picking up quite a few votes and in actually increasing the independent vote from last time at many of the booths across the electorate.
Now, some people would consider Voices for Indi a political party. What is this party, and is that even true? No, it's not true, but I guess since Cathy McGowan and the other independents all got together, it's sort of become like a quasi-party. Some people think it is, but it's not a registered political party. There was a big debate about this in the 2013 election, and it was always found to not actually be a political party, and as such didn't need to be registered with the Electoral Commission.
Thanks for that, Ashley. Now, there's only 3 seats that are actually independent in the country. Mary, do you think that there's hope for independents to gain more seats this election?
I would have thought so before tonight. I'm not quite so confident right now. But I think this election has been very presidential. You've had Scott Morrison running a one-man band for the Liberal Party, and you've had Bill Shorten front and centre as the leader of the opposition always does, but you've seen his cabinet. And I think people have seen quite a difference in the offerings of the two major parties. When that is the case, often the independents fall back a bit in terms of their support. The big difference, though, is in regional areas. There's an argument that not only the point that Paul made, that it's a very split country at the moment, north and south geographically, but it's also seemingly quite split between regional Australia and inner city or metropolitan Australia. And the independents could do well in some of those seats.
Do you think that this one-man band, sort of dad-man ScoMo, it works better in the regional areas than in the metropolitan?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do. Yes, the sort of, the joker in the pack and a different baseball hat every day. At least that's a break, I guess, from the hard hats and the high vis, which they run around in mostly through the campaigns. But there was no one who could stand with Morrison, and that's what's interesting. The Prime Minister has done a Herculean job because his deputy, Julie Bishop, has resigned. She's leaving the Parliament. Senior ministers like Christopher Pyne, which we've already spoken about, well, he's leaving the party. Mr Dutton in Dixon is fighting for his seat and is not seen as terribly popular outside Queensland, so he wasn't on the hustings at all. Barnaby Joyce, who used to be considered the greatest retail politician in Australia, that's debated. I see he's won his seat, he's held his seat of New England, but there weren't too many people around. Josh Frydenberg, of course, had to sandbag his own seat here in Victoria against a very high-profile independent. So Scott Morrison had to do the heavy lifting for the party really all by himself.
Thank you, Mary. Now we're taking things a bit more local now. We have Tavleen Singh, who's over in Flinders. Tavleen, what's the vibe been down there in the seat?
Thanks, Rachel. So Flinders has been a key seat for this elections, and fairly so, because while the seat has been a Liberal safe seat still now, it is up for the public to decide who will be the leader for Flinders from now onwards. So with Liberals, Greg Hunt still continuing on, and we have Labour trying to or hoping for a win with the ferocious swing from last November, and of course the involvement of Julia Banks that did create a lot of waves for Flinders. Julia Banks left her own seat of Chiselhome and became a candidate for Flinders, standing against former colleague Greg Hunt. So far, even today, the polling booth, which I'm standing outside right now, St. Mark's Uniting Church, had a lot of people come in. Greg Hunt visited as well, and he encouraged everyone to go vote. And even the volunteers were very energetic. So the whole vibe of the high enrollment rate throughout the nation was very visible today here at Flinders. Also, another thing to be noticed was that while volunteers from all the 9 candidates were nearly here, the absence of United Australia Party's boards and volunteers was seen. One of the AEC supervisors also commented on how the voters' number here was very large from the last election.
Tavleen, a lot of independent candidates have contested Flinders. What impact has that made in the usually safe Liberal seat?
Thanks for that, Ari. There have been 3 candidates here this time, and surprisingly, there have been a lot of waves because of that very reason. So, of course, Julia Banks contesting from here has created a lot of dynamics, which we'll be seeing after the results. But yes, because of that, the pre-polling also showed a divide between the public's votes. Though the pre-polls have been leaning towards Liberal, the result is yet to be seen. Apart from this, the other 2 candidates, one is Harry Drager and one is Susie Beveridge. While we saw campaigns by Miss Beveridge, Harry Drager was noticeably absent from his campaigning as well.
Well, we know climate change has been an important part of this election. Did it play a big role during the campaign in Flinders?
Definitely. While Julia Banks' whole campaign focused on the climate change issue a lot, people here have also called the Western Port Bay as Mornington's own Adani mine, so to speak. But apart from this, all the candidates, while have their own differences, the 3-horse race, which is being seen between Liberal, Labour and independent candidate Julia Banks, all these 3 candidates have so far agreed that the Western Bay port should be closed down and should not go ahead. Apart from this, the people here feel that while climate change is an important issue for throughout the nation, it is not as important or as much a top priority as roads and affordable housing here in Flinders.
Thank you for that in-depth report, Tavleen. One of the Liberal candidates involved in dumping Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister last year was former Defence Minister Kevin Andrews. He's held the seat of Menzies in Melbourne out east since 1991. RMIT's Joe Moniz asked Kevin Andrews where his conservative ideology conflicts with his work as a local MP.
I seek to represent the broad views of the people in this electorate. This electorate is made up of essentially hard-working tradespeople, professionals. They look for good education for their children, they want a strong economy, and I've sought to reflect their views.
So how's the party feeling leading up to the federal election, given the shift towards Labor in the last state election?
Look, every election is tough. I never take my seat for granted, and don't think any of my colleagues take their seats for granted as well. It's a matter of being out there, listening to what people are saying. I was at a men's shed this morning, about 60 people there listening to their views about a range of issues. If you do that all the time, then you've got a sense of what people are wanting, and hopefully they're reflected in our policies, and if we do that successfully, then we'll be re-elected.
Menzies has always been a strong Liberal seat. Are there any concerns given that the boundaries of the electorate have changed, bringing in strong Labor supporters?
Well, the boundaries have changed, and that means that the nominal position of the seat has changed from what it was, and that means that I need to continue to make contact with people, particularly in the new area that I haven't been their member for in the past, to try and represent them. So, for example, as I said this morning, I was at a men's shed in Eltham, which is in the new part of the electorate, listening to what their concerns are, and they can vary from different parts of the electorate to others.
Have there been any changes from, I guess, now the boundaries have broadened up, that some of the issues that these new areas are bringing into you?
There's two overwhelming issues that people mention to me. One is what I'd broadly call congestion, the fact that the roads are crowded, that public transport is crowded, that housing prices are such that many people feel that young people in particular can't get into housing or can't afford to get into housing. That's the number one issue that I find all the time in the electorate, and that's true of the new part of the electorate as well as the old part. And the second one is just the cost of living. People are concerned about increases in electricity prices. I hear of pensioners who don't turn on their heating in winter or their cooling in summer because they feel that they can't afford it. Now, this is in a relatively well-to-do area. That is a concern for many people.
That was a fantastic report. I'm going to throw over to Mary now, who's got some new insight and updates on Menzies and on Dixon. Mary.
Yes, well, Menzies has been held by the Liberal Party. Kevin Andrews has been returned, so he'll return to Canberra in a very comfortable way. In the seat of Flinders, and that's Greg Hunt's seat, he's held that for quite some time. He's in front, but it's a very, very tight contest between himself and the Labor candidate Josh Sinclair. So it'll be interesting to see where Julia Banks' preferences go. That might be quite decisive. Back to Queensland. In Queensland, Peter Dutton has held his seat of Dixon. Indeed, he's improved his vote by 3.9%. So it seems that the change of leadership for the Liberals has paid dividends in Queensland. What it's meant for the rest of the country, I think, is less clear, but it's paid dividends for the Liberal National Party in Queensland.
Does that surprise you, seeing as GetUp put 12,000 people over the past 5 weeks into door-knocking to out Dutton?
Yes, it's interesting because it's people power versus a war chest, and Peter Dutton had multi-million dollars. Everywhere you went in that electorate, there was his face and his story. And he kept a pretty low profile in terms of interviews, but his presence in terms of the visual presence and the amount of material that was sent because he had a massive war chest. He's a good campaigner.
Paul, would you like to weigh in on this?
Well, at this point, and again, we caution it's early, this election isn't tracking as the polls suggested. For example, at the moment, we're looking at figures that the Liberals have potentially picked up Braddon in Tasmania, Lindsay in New South Wales, Longman in Queensland. Now, if that's the case, unless Labor's going to offset them with victories elsewhere, and I've just checked on some of the latest figures in Victoria, and at the moment they're struggling to pick up seats like Chisholm and the Trobe, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult for Labor to win this election. So we went into this night with the polls suggesting Labor would have a modest, but nevertheless a victory. But at the moment, things aren't trending that way. WA could be very important. Labor's had its eye on a few seats, but you know, there's a question of whether it's going to, buck this trend. And, I would think there's some anxiety in the Labor camp at the moment, looking at these figures at the moment.
Thanks, guys. Some great insight there. Now we're going to go back to the south coast of New South Wales, where David Barnett Clement is planted outside the Labor's seat of Gilmore. And David, can you bring us up to speed? What's going on?
Yeah, thanks, Ari. There's been huge cheers in the room of late. We have seen a swing towards Labor in the seat of Gilmore, and things are looking up. Initially, the room, the atmosphere was a little bit settled. I think people were a bit cautious about calling things too early, but everyone in the room seems to be quite positive at the moment.
Now, the seat of Gilmore has been one of those must-watch seats. What's the feel like in the room down there?
I'd say that at the moment, you're really looking at a fingers crossed kind of scenario. I think that the early start of the coalition nationally kind of gave people some cause for concern. But at the moment, we really are seeing a turn in the tide, I think, down here in Gilmore, especially here at the ALP headquarters. There's been lots of cheering of late, and I think people really are expecting things to be on the up.
This turn in the tide, you say, is the picture any clearer now?
Yeah, I'd say so. So we've seen a swing of 7.6% towards the Labor candidate, Fiona Phillips. And I think that really this has come down to a number of key issues that have really resonated with the people of Gilmore. Climate change has been a real one of them. And I feel like the policy platform that Labor has brought into this campaign has really resonated with residents in Gilmore who are perhaps more exposed to some of the effects of climate change being on the south coast and closer to the ocean than some other parts of Australia. On top of that, I think that the jobs prospects of people here in Gilmore, Labor has promised a lot of money towards funding the Princess Highway development, and I feel like this has really grouped some voters as well.
Fantastic, David, and make sure that you make the most of those celebrations, whichever way the party ends up going. Now we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere because we'll be right back.
This is Election 2019, with nationwide coverage from journalism students from across Australia.
You're watching The Junction's live coverage of the 2019 federal election.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Election 2019. We're coming to you live from the RMIT studios and going out on Channel 31 in Melbourne, Channel 44 in Adelaide, WTV in Perth, Facebook Live and community radio stations across Australia. We're going to dive straight back in with Julius Dennis from Swinburne University here in Melbourne, covering the seat of Higgins, which has historically been a blue ribbon seat, but seems to be up for grabs this election for just about anyone. Can you tell us a bit more about that, Julius?
Well, Higgins has traditionally been a Liberal seat, like you said, since its inception in 1949. that's been held by the party. It's had 2 PMs and a notable treasurer in Peter Costello. But this time around, Katie Allen, the Liberal candidate, is facing a significant swing or possible swing against her from both the Greens in Jason Ball and Labor Party in Fiona McLeod. So after Kelly O'Dwyer retired, just before the election process began, they had to do a quick pre-selection, and the Greens had an 8% swing in 2016, which means that there was a strong swing towards the left, especially because 67% of Higgins voters have climate change as their major issue. If you're watching at home, if Katie Allen goes below 50%, she could be in trouble in terms of winning this election.
So the current candidates are not exactly your average candidates for Higgins. Who are they?
No, you're right. In Katie Allen, you've got a very notable paediatrician, very well known in the medical world. For Labor, Fiona McLeod, SC, Senior Counsel, she's led Royal Commissions. She's led the Australian Bar Association. And for the Greens, Jason Ball, he's a very well-known LGBTQI activist. He's the first openly gay Victorian football player. So, yeah, all of these guys are very high profile. They're actually all here earlier at South Yarra Library to end the day, all right next to each other.
Thank you for that, Julius. Now we're going to head to Mary, who has some breaking news. Mary.
Well, it's really tight in Higgins. At the moment, as we've just heard, the Liberal candidate Katie Allen is ahead, but it's very tight. It's looking like 52 to 47 to Labor's Fiona McLeod. And as was explained in that terrific package, we are not sure how those preferences are going to fall. But a 7.9% swing to Labor, but it looks as though Katie Allen might hold on depending on those preferences. So it looks as though those key seats that the Liberals needed to sandbag are probably going to hold on.
Thanks for that, Mary. We're going to head to the green room now, where Jesse Burns, and we're going to see what he has to say about the seat of Herbert and the Adani mines. Jesse.
Yes, thank you, guys. Well, before we go on Herbert, we're just going to touch on some breaking news. Tony Abbott, as predicted, coming in now, it seems as though he may have lost his seat to Zali Steggall. Huge news for the former Prime Minister. Will he be out of Australian politics for the first time in, well, quite some time? It looks as though it might be happening. But now let's turn over to the Queensland seat of Herbert. It was won by Labor MP Cathy O'Toole in 2016 by a mere 37 votes, making it the most marginal seat in the country. As you can see on our graph now, O'Toole had fewer first preference votes than Liberals, but preference managed to get Labor over the line and Toole as well. This election, O'Toole is running against young Queensland over the year, Phil Thompson. How's that for an opponent for the Liberal National Party? There is also a swag of minor party candidates from the United Australian Party to the Greens. The seat covers more than 900 square kilometres and has over 100,000 voters. It includes most of Townsville as well as Magnetic and Palm Islands. One of the major issues driving the debate in the seat has been the proposed Adani coal mine, as we touched on before. Here you can see a Google graph showing trends in the Adani coal mine in the state of Queensland. As you can see, people are consistently interested in the mine over the last week, not just in Queensland, but of course all around Australia. The federal government approved the project earlier this month, just before calling the election. Support for the mine is strong in the seat, and most of Queensland, which we can see here in Google search trends. The mine is popular because of the 10,000 promised jobs, although that claim is disputed. Townsville has a jobless rate of around 8%, 3% higher than the national average, just staggering. But its youth unemployment rate is twice that, making jobs and the future of mining key issues for voters in this electorate. The people of Herbert also have concerns with the quality of drinking water on Palm Island and the recovery from deadly floods in Townsville earlier this year. Looking at Google search trends, Labor is the most searched party in Townsville, as you can see over here. Is that indicative of which way the seat may swing this election? Well, we will soon find out. Guys, it's back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Jesse. We're going to go live now to our nation's capital in Canberra, where we've got Tessa Grimes on the ground. Tessa, what's the atmosphere in the capital been like on election day?
Well, despite being the hub of Parliament, the political frenzy is being focused outside of Canberra today, with a lot of the major party leaders choosing other capital cities to celebrate in tonight.
And with the National Tally Room being axed a couple of years ago, it means that media outlets have their main broadcast centres outside of Canberra as well. And 2019 has also shown a record number of postal votes and pre-polling, so the booths are looking relatively quiet this year compared with others.
Now, are we correct in saying that Canberra has undergone some changes for this election?
Yes, you'd be correct. The ACT electorates have undergone some redistribution to accommodate the brand new seat of Bean. So this means for the existing electorates of Canberra and Fenner, they'll have a bit of a different look about them this year. The demographics of Canberra in particular have changed, so it will be interesting to see how this affects the voting patterns.
Now, this electorate has been a long-standing Labor stronghold. Do you think another party has a chance of winning this time round?
Well, Tim Hollow from the Greens party thinks that the new boundaries in the inner city of Canberra means that they have got a strong chance of success after the popular Labor MP, Gabe Brodman, has announced that she's stepping down this year. But notional post-redistribution margins see that Labor still holds 63%, Liberals at half that, and the Greens at less than 20%. And we've just had a look at the latest figures, and it looks like Labor has retained the seats of Canberra and Fenner.
Fantastic news. What issues have struck a chord with the voters in Canberra?
So health and climate change have been really big, really important for the voters of Canberra. With such a big focus on mental health as well in this year's budget, it's been a really big draw card for the voters in the ACT. And in light of all of the school protests on climate change, it's been a really tough issue for candidates to ignore. So a lot of the candidates have been really focusing on this in their campaigns.
Well, thanks very much for bringing us the latest from the capital, Tessa. We're going to make our way down to New South Wales and have a quick chat to Claire Sams, who's out there in the seat of Kayla. What's the atmosphere like around there, Claire, and what's the significance of that seat?
Well, the ABC has called it, and the Nats will retain the seat of Claire. Nearly 25% of votes have been counted, and it looks like Andrew G will retain the seat. It's typically a safe national seat with towns like Bathurst, Orange and Lithgow within it. It is a consistent Conservative seat. Andrew G currently holds the seat with a margin of nearly 12%, but a swing to Labor has happened before, but it looks like it won't happen this election again. The wild card in this election is the shooters, fishers and farmers, who will be contesting this seat for the first time in this federal election. So, that will be an interesting one to see how that will play out too. The atmosphere, we've been speaking to some voters down here today. There is still some strong support for G, even though there is a swing away from him. There's some dissatisfaction with the way that the candidates have been focusing on the region, saying they're focusing too much on cities and things like that. The biggest concern for the National Party is the shooters, fishers and farmers contesting the seat. Sam Romano is an avid climate change denier, so the reason for this is their performance in the state election was very strong. The Nats suffered nearly a 40% swing away from them in the state election in the seat of Orange, which is significant. So it will be interesting to see how that will play out for Orange voters in this federal election. Because Orange voters do make up a significant amount of Claire's voters. It looks like G will still retain the seat, but the thing is he will suffer a swing against him because of the shooters, fishers and farmers. So even though he has a large margin of 12% currently, he may actually, that margin may tighten this election. So that's what things are looking like down here.
Thanks for that. We're just going to quickly cross to Mary, who's got a quick update for us.
Well, we've just heard that Tony Abbott has conceded. The former Prime Minister will leave the Parliament. He's been resoundingly beaten by the independent Steli Carly Steggall. Also, another independent's done extremely well in New South Wales, in Sydney, and that's Karen Phelps in Wentworth. She won it in the by-election after Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser left the parliament when he lost the leadership. She has held the seat with a swing towards her of 23.9%.
That's Mary, but those figures are from the previous federal election rather than the recent by-election. So, but it does look like she's going to hold, which is, I think
very
the Liberal Party
considerable.
will be surprised at that. They thought they would reclaim that seat.
Yeah, and I think what it shows, Paul, perhaps, is we've been talking about the split in the country, the vote north and south of the continent. It may be suggesting there's a bit of a firmer split in the Liberal Party. You know, what is the centre? What is the soul of the Liberal Party? If you've got blue ribbon seats like Warringah and Wentworth going to independents, it'll be interesting to see if the blue ribbon seats in Victoria, for example, are held by the Liberals, as it looks as though they might be. But it's a fascinating election. We've got splits all over the country.
Thanks for that, Mary and Paul. Just to reiterate, Tony Abbott has conceded the seat of Warringah and the incumbent is Zali Steggall. Let's cross back to Warringah again quickly to see how Lachlan Mofeet-Gray is doing in Tony Abbott's electorate. Lachlan, why has there been so much media attention around a contest being an upstart, independent and a Liberal backbencher?
The small crowds that have come here tonight to support him inside the room, the encore room, appropriately titled.
Have we go?
So if you're just joining the program now, the seat of Wentworth has been won by the independent Karen Phelps. Now it's interesting if we look back on the history of Wentworth, and Mary and Paul, I'll be looking for your insights on this. Now that Phelps has been re-elected, and we did see that swing away from the Liberal Party in Wentworth, and there were many people who interpreted that to be a protest against the departure of Malcolm Turnbull. So I suppose the electorate seems to be genuinely unhappy with the direction of the coalition. Would that be fair to say?
Well, you know, Karen Phelps only won that seat, 5 minutes ago. She went into Parliament and she helped broker a deal about refugee medical care on Manus Island. And it seems there are a lot of voters in the seat of Wentworth who see that as a high priority. The Liberals were confident that they would win back that seat. Dave Sharma is a prodigious fundraiser. He's been all over the electorate. He's had big backers. But it seems that this independent, Karen Phelps, has made a bit of a splash and they like her in Wentworth.
But the problem, again, to emphasise here, for the Labor Party, for example, it shows that there are swings against the Liberal Party in inner urban, leafy electorates, but it's not occurring to any of the... In fact, it's Labor's vote that is off. And so we do have this split. It looks like inner urban leafy areas are swinging against the Liberal Party. Victoria is swinging against the Liberal Party, but not to the extent was expected. But in other parts of the country, if anything, and Queensland's clearly, if anything, gone the other way. So we do have what is being panning out as a stark divide. And as I said, WA, where it now lands is likely to be, really important.
Well, we could have a hung parliament, and these two independent women who've just won these blue ribbon Liberal seats could be significant players, particularly in a policy sense, if the numbers are as tight as they might be. The swings are extraordinary. I mean, a swing in Isaac, that's a safe seat for Labor, has been very, very high. The seat next to it, Labor's held, but it's been a very small swing. So it's a seat-by-seat battle. I mean, I think the parties now are really in the trenches. And it will be, Paul might be right. It might be Western Australia. Of course, Trebs, we haven't heard anything from South Australia yet. They'll be interesting as well. No Nick Xenophon this
I'll
year.
just jump in there. The latest figure, and this is Labor is now ahead in Boothby. Now, Boothby, Labor again, polling suggested that Labor had effectively said Boothby's going to be too difficult.
That's right.
Status quo in South Australia. Suddenly, Labor's ahead in Boothby. Labor's now also ahead in Chisholm. So there's a lot of moving around at the moment. And again, that's why we have to be so cautious at anything we say. But I still think at the moment what is true is that the election is not panning out according to what the polls suggested.
No, because the polls are binary. They're not a predictor. They are how you feel at the moment, and it's usually, is it Bill Shorten or is it Scott Morrison? And of course, when people go into the booth to vote, they vote on so many other issues, and it can vary from almost, clearly seat to seat, booth to booth, and that's what we're seeing here. It's a tough election for both sides, quite frankly.
Yeah, both their the major primaries are off at the moment.
Yep.
United Australia Party on about 3.5%. It's looking like the moment. So One Nation's looks like it's got a small swing to it nationally as well. So it's small parties, the micros on the right, which seem to be actually attracting some of that vote. And because their preferences are going to, come back to the coalition, there was estimates of 60%. That's why I think one of the reasons why things aren't going as well for Labor as it hoped.
And another woman, independent, has just won, and we're talking about South Australia, she's won Mayo, and that's Rebecca Sharkey. She was under real attack from Georgina Downer, who's the daughter of former Foreign Minister and briefly a Liberal leader, Alexander Downer. So her vote is has held, and that's another independent woman with progressive politics, probably considered more a sort of a moderate progressive Liberal than anything else. So this is...
and while we're on the theme of independence again, things are bouncing around now. Indi's showing that the independents back. Helen Haynes is now back in front. So things are bouncing around a lot at the moment out there.
Well, it sounds like we've got a big night ahead of us, and with that, our election coverage has been extended and we'll be here with you until 8:30. We're going to take a quick ad break now, but don't go anywhere.
You're watching Election 2019, presented by The Junction.
You're watching Election 2019, live from the studios of RMIT Melbourne, presented by The Junction.
Welcome back, and we're going to cross now quickly to the seat of Warringah, where Tony Abbott has lost the seat, and that's just a huge development, isn't it? What's the feel like down there?
Well, I have to say, Ari, it feels absolutely chaotic down here. I'm standing outside the club where in just a few minutes' time, Abbott is expected to arrive and give his concession speech. So media's trying to get in through the doors. They keep getting pushed back out, and really no one knows what's happening and who's going where.
That's the thing, you're not getting any answer.
So what will this mean for the new government?
Well, Zali Steggall seems to have won. That's what Anthony Green is called. Whichever government wins, Labor or Liberal, Zali will work with them with their own views in mind. If it's a hung parliament, expect Zali Steggall to give her support to the Liberal Party. She has stated previously that she will be doing that. If the Labor Party wins, expect her to work with them on environmental policy, but against them on their economic policy.
Thanks for that update, Lachlan. We're now going to cross to Jesse Burns in the Studio B with the latest.
Yeah, guys, thank you very much. Well, I thought I'd show you a few Google Trends that have been popular in Australia. This chart here shows leaders that have been searched in Google. At the top here with 43 is Bill Shorten, closely followed by Scott Morrison. Then we have Clive Palmer, who's a little bit less, but perhaps that's because he's been flooding us with his advertisements. We don't necessarily need to search him. Then we have Pauline Hanson, a controversial figure, always high in Google. And then Richard Di Natale down the bottom. But the Greens obviously are a key player in this election. Looking now to a different graph, I just want to show you key issues that people have been searching in Google over the last year. As you can see right at the top there is tax. Tax, obviously a very divisive issue, clearly, for voters in this election and over the last year. Below that, education. Obviously, the Liberals have cut funding to universities. That's been a key issue for particularly students. And then healthcare. Labor, obviously coming out with their dental plan, but it's quite low. Jobs and immigration, as we spoke before, with immigration, not such a key issue in this election. It was in the previous election, but perhaps not so much today. And that shows, as you can see, it's quite low compared to issues such as tax and education. Guys, tax and education obviously is a key issue and one that Labor and Liberal will be looking to win voters on. For now, it's back to you.
Thanks, Jesse. Now the seats are being called left, right and centre. Mary, what's the latest?
Oh, look, it is so tight. The LNP have got 62 seats at the moment, ALP 59 and other are 5. Now there's several of those independents that we've just been discussing. I think, Paul, you were saying that Menzies is now being called or looking as though a Labor possible hold?
No, that was Chisholm.
Chisholm.
Look, things are bouncing around. For example, a moment ago, Bass was in the column for a pickup for the Liberal Party, but that's now bounced out of that column. So, again, I'm being very cautious. At the moment, we're seeing possibly 4 Liberal gains, 2 Labor gains, 1 independent gain, that being Warringah. So net at the moment, that's about 75 for the coalition. You add in potentially, as we said, Zali Steggall had said that she would side with the Liberal Party. That might get the majority. As I said, what I keep on coming back to at the moment, WA could be absolutely crucial, 2 seats either way. We're looking like we're in again that territory, though, of, mid-70s. Now, you need 76 seats in the expanded House of Representatives of 151, and both sides are at the moment, battling to get there. So it's an intriguing night.
I'll just have to bring in the latest update from Diane Beamer has conceded the seat of Lindsay, and we're going to cross now to Joseph Palmer in the electorate. Joseph, what's the latest update?
So it's just, we just got the news from Diane Beamer's media liaison that she's going to concede. As you can see, we're here at her makeshift headquarters, if you like. people, they seem to be kind of, upset, obviously. But yeah, word is that she's about to walk through the door any second soon. We've been hearing that though for the past 2 hours. So yeah.
This must spell danger for the Labor Party because they're not going to have enough pickups to call.
No, well, absolutely. So, Lindsay was an essential seat. It's a marginal seat. Yeah, it's gone between Labor and Liberal a lot over the years, but yeah, they were really banking on this seat. It's a key seat for Sydney, or for Western Sydney rather. Yeah. And it comes because it's a bit strange though, because there was for a moment there quite a bit of a swing, about a 5% swing toward Labor, but then out of nowhere it just went the other way. Yeah, so we'll be hearing from Diane Beamer as she comes through, and hopefully we'll be able to grab an interview with her. But apparently, yes, she's going to come and thank her supporters and yeah, officially admit that, or concede the election, or this seat anyway. But we do have some other news. Apparently the Liberals from Shifley, Lindsay, Macquarie and Mitchell are meeting at Panthers, which is quite a large establishment here in Penrith, and they're going to be following the results live. We've got a couple of contacts over there who are feeding us information. But yeah, apparently it's quite a big show over there at the moment.
So Mary, now we've just had conceded defeat in the seat of Lindsay. What does that mean for the region?
Well, of course, Lindsay's in New South Wales. That was a really messy voting for the Labor Party. I think they'd agree. They certainly were hoping that it was not going to be lost. It seems that New South Wales is, as I said before, is really breaking for the independents in the inner seats of Sydney, and breaking to the Liberals in outer metropolitan. So again, they're going to be relying in New South Wales on the National Party vote, which I haven't seen the figures yet, but they seem to be holding the seats that they were a bit nervous about, even though their vote has dropped. Longman has been lost, as we said, in Queensland, back to the LNP. So the Libs are doing very, very well. The Liberal National Party is doing very well in Queensland, as was expected. And of course, Scott Morrison has been campaigning very, very hard, as did Bill Shorten. We should note that Bill Shorten has held his seat very convincingly here in Maribyrnong, just as a note.
Do you think that pre-polls have predicted it too early?
Well, it's interesting that how the pre-polls have been counted, and it's not 9 o'clock yet, so they haven't been counted.
Yeah. This has always been something of a concern as to whether there might be a different pattern in the pre-polls. And I noted Matthew Guy. I think Matthew Guy tweeted this, the former Liberal Party leader in Victoria, saying psephologists who call the election too early, before the pre-polls are incorporated into the vote, are at risk of getting egg on their face. So, again, that's another sort of the wild card of this evening. But one thing I keep on looking at is that Labor's primary vote nationally is stagnant, and they'll be very disappointed about that. It's at the moment showing up as 33.2%, and it's awfully difficult to win government from there, if not nigh on possible.
And what's the Green vote doing?
The Green vote's up 0.5% at the moment on these figures. No.
Not
so
enough to lift.
Where the chief growth is on the right minor parties.
Sorry guys, I'm going to have to cut you
to
short.
Deakin now, one of the minor parties that has attracted much attention, particularly for young voters, is the Animal Justice Party. Now, candidate Vinta Costantino says she wants to be a voice for animal welfare in Parliament. Melbourne's uni Meg Lanlu filed this report from Deakin.
Benita Costantino with her dogs at the polling booth in Deakin.
Beautiful girl.
She is campaigning as a candidate for the Animal Justice Party. It's Australia's first political party created entirely to fight for animal protections.
We need people to be the voice for animals, to, be the voice for the voiceless, as we say.
It's a small but vocal movement. At her first forum, Benita is sharing the stage with other candidates to share her platform. She arrived early to practice her speech. She is determined to get her message across.
I'm passionate. I'm not here for the politics. I'm not here for the fame. I'm not here for the money. I'm here to end cruelty to animals, and I hope that I can be a really good advocate for that. I like to be standing out here saying, I'm a psychologist and I'm an advocate for animal welfare. I'm not an unemployed hippie that is the stereotype. I have a job. I take time off my job to come and stand up for animal rights. So I'm hoping that I potentially represent a broad spectrum of the community, particularly not growing up in a privileged environment. I don't believe that any particular party is representing animal welfare as it should be represented, and that is why I'm here. Even if one person walks away saying, that makes sense, and I'm going to look more into this, then I've done my job.
The Animal Justice Party only won 3% of votes in Deakin in the last federal election, meaning there's little chance to get a seat. But getting her party's message across is a win of its own for her. Meng Fan Lu in Deakin for election 2019.
And we've had some breaking news come through, but before that we're going to head to a quick break, so we'll see you straight after.
You're watching Election 2019, presented by The Junction.
You're watching The Junction's live coverage of the 2019 federal election.
Welcome back to Election 2019, which is proudly brought to you by the Judith Neilson Institute for Journalism and Ideas. Now, as we said before the break, we have some breaking news. We're going to cross live now to Cooper, which has seen a big swing. What's the latest down in Cooper? We'll take it to Mary.
Cooper. Well, as we said, there's been a swing of 5% to Labor. Libby Coker has a 5% lead at the moment over Sarah Henderson. That is, Sarah Henderson has lost 3% of her primary vote, with Libby Coker picking up a 3%. Safe to say that Libby Coker is in a box seat to win the seat.
Just to correct that, we're in Corangamite. Now that the incumbent Sarah Henderson looks like she has lost her seat, Alex Blaine is in the seat. Alex, what does it feel like right there now?
Well, we were just at the Labor headquarters there, and it started off the night with a quiet optimism, and it's grown into more of a celebratory atmosphere here as Sarah Henderson has seemingly lost the seat to Libby Coker, who picked up a 3% advantage in her primary vote for a 5% lead overall.
Mary, we'll throw that one to you. Corangamite, one of the most marginal seats in Victoria. Has the result come as a big surprise to you?
Well, I certainly didn't have it in the Labor column. I thought that was quite a risky one, but that's a very strong swing. Libby Coker, I think, was the mayor of the Surf Coast Shire. She ran a very strong campaign, as did Sarah Henderson. And certainly, as we said earlier, the Liberal National Government threw billions of dollars in promises. It was worked out, I think, to 26,500 each for each voter, eligible voter in Corangamite. So it appears that something else has occurred there. They were also running a very strong campaign against Labor's fringe benefits tax. And also, the fringe, anyway, it'll come to me, the tax issue. The franking credits is what I was struggling for, the franking credits, because there's quite a few retirees down in that electorate. And certainly Scott Morrison was running the great big tax scare. And so many in the Labor Party thought that there was a big risk that the Libs would hold on to that. So I think Libby Coker's done extremely well. And again, I suggest it might be climate change. It'll be interesting to find out why that result has been so strong for Labor.
It's about a 2.5% swing. So Labor will be pleased. It was notionally Labor by,
redistribution,
a very tiny number of votes. But at another level, of course, it reflects that swing's not quite what Labor was hoping for more generally, and that's the ongoing pattern here tonight.
Yeah, I think it's seat by seat, and Sarah Henderson is a very strong candidate, and has been campaigning. She won the seat last time when people wrote her off in 2016. So what we're seeing in this election is seats side by side are doing what perhaps people didn't expect, and it's a battle in the trenches.
It is indeed. Now we're crossing to Cooper, where our reporter is standing by, Josie Douglas. Josie, can you tell us what's the latest?
Well, we're here in front of the Preston's Child Hall, and Jed Carney has just come past it, and she was very happy, smiling, said hello, because the results are very good for her. There's been a 14.4 swing percent towards the Labor Party, and they'll win the seat quite easily. In first preferences, they've won over 48% of first preferences, with the Greens only just getting over 20%, which is about a swing of 16% against them. So it's really proved that this area, that what people have been saying, that the Labor Party is really connecting with voters in Cooper.
Now, did the Labor swing come as a big surprise, or were voters expecting it?
Not this big, I don't think. They won the last seat in the by-election last year when the seat was called Batman by 1.3%. So now it's at 14.4%. So that's a massive swing. I think no one expected it to be this big. They were expecting it to win, but this is just massive for the Labor Party in Cooper. And for Jed Carney, because I think she's really proving that she really is a rising star of the party.
Thanks for that. I'll throw it to the panel now. Paul, do you want to weigh in on this one?
I think that is exactly right. She's regarded very highly locally. I'm surprised, though, the scale of that swing. It also possibly reflects as well that the Greens decided that given Jed Carney had gained that seat and she had such traction locally, they would shift their focus elsewhere to seats like McNamara and Higgins. Now, so far that doesn't seem to have paid off tonight. So overall, it will be interesting to see, just how the Greens are going to come out of it tonight. If it's disappointing for Labor, I think it might also be trending to be disappointing for the Greens as well.
Yeah, it was particular focus in what was the seat of Batman and now Cooper. The Greens had a very messy state election campaign, and that sort of carried over into the 2016 vote as well. So I think you're right. I think the Greens have decided that Jed Carney's just a star, and she's loved out there, and she's going to be a rising star on the Labor Party.
Thanks for that, guys. Keep us updated. We're going to cross now to our stats man again in the green room, and he's got more information. Jesse, what is the numbers telling you?
Pad out, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. Hey guys, well, welcome back. Yes, well, we have a few things to update. Obviously, the election is way too close to call at the moment. Barry Cassidy saying a few things coming out and saying unless pre-polls swing back to Labor, they'll struggle to get 76 seats, more likely a coalition minority or even at a pinch majority. If it is a minority, that asks a few questions of who they'll form a coalition with, a huge question indeed. This night is getting pretty exciting. I just want to take you over to, the seat of Herbert. The seat of Herbert, as we spoke about before, has actually swung to the Liberals by 6%. A really big deal. Labor lost, and we spoke quite in depth about that before and what that means for the people of Herbert. Looking at Tony Abbott as well, he lost his seat obviously for the first time in quite a while. We will no longer be seeing the voice of Tony Abbott. You can look over here, as you can see that it was back in the last election he had a 61% win with opposition at 38%, but this election a major swing to Zali Steggall with 59%. Shame for Tony Abbott, but indeed Zali is going to play a key factor in forming perhaps a majority for the coalition in this election. Guys, that's all for now from the team and I, and we hope to see you soon. Back to you.
Thanks, Jesse. Now we cross to Sydney, where Sydney Cameron is currently there in the seat that's currently being held by Tanya Plibersek. Sydney, can you tell us what is the latest down there?
Thank you, Rachel. Well, the atmosphere here is buzzing as people have been cheering. As some of the seats have come through, there looks like there's going to be a very strong victory by Tanya Plibersek. Currently, 31% of the votes have been counted for Sydney, with 68% having gone to Tanya. Jackie Munro, the Liberal candidate for Sydney, is in a close second at about 30%. And currently, there's a 3.4% swing to the ALP. There haven't been many election promises made to Sydney, as it's regarded as a very safe Labor seat. However, the Labor's federal policies regarding education are due to affect the seat in quite a dramatic way. Some of the crowd has been cheering quite a lot. The biggest cheer of the night has been when Tony Abbott lost his seat in Warringah.
And how do you think this will impact Sydney?
So the young population of Sydney, with the median age of 32, is likely to be impacted greatly by some of the Labor promises that have been made, particularly some of the funding that's due to go to universities and TAFEs. And furthermore, Tanya Plibersek has also noted that the standards will be raised, in particular in regards to English standards. Further, the high immigrant population of Sydney, with only 39% of Sydneysiders having been born in Australia, is due to experience quite an impact on the Labor promises in regards to immigration. Labor has pledged to lift the minimum pay rate for foreign temporary workers, and there have also been quite a lot of protests in the Sydney area in regards to refugees and asylum seekers, with the Palm Sunday protest happening in the Sydney electorate. And Labor was a strong supporter of the Medi-Vac laws. However, the coalition has promised to repeal those laws should they be re-elected.
Now we'll throw to Mary. Mary, as we've just heard, Tanya Plibersek, she's promised to lift the minimum pay wage for foreign workers. Could this play out in her favour tonight?
Well, it's a very strong seat for Labor, and Tanya Plibersek as Deputy Leader is very, very popular right across the country. There was a couple of elections ago, the Greens mounted a bit of a campaign against Tanya in her inner Sydney seat. She withstood that, and now it's a very, very, very strong seat. She's Shadow Minister for Education and also for Women and Deputy Leader of the party. So she's a very distinguished Member of Parliament and a great leader. She would make a very good Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, but it might be a big ask right now.
Dare I say Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
I think actually the bigger question now around Tanya Plibersek is things are panning out that whether she will put her hand up for being opposition leader is probably the more likely scenario coming out tonight. And I think, you know, this is now one, it has to start to be factored into the equation. You know, shortens the leadership, the big agenda that Labor bravely and boldly put out to the electorate, whether it's again proven here tonight that is extremely difficult to put out a big agenda because it leaves you wide open to a negative campaign. And Scott Morrison, despite not having no ministers around him virtually, was able to prosecute that campaign, particularly around Labor's reforms of negative gearing and so on in tax, and it seems to have bitten. And, you know, we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves, but things are difficult.
Depressingly, Paul, if this pans out the way it may do, I think it's going to be a hung parliament actually, but I can't tell. But what it does say is that, Australians are receptive to a great big scare campaign. Tony Abbott did it on the climate policy of the Gillard government, and it appears that Morrison has been quite successful on the changes that affect so few people but are significant when you use the word tax. So Australians not really, because we've had so much growth, not really amenable to the notion of distribution changes. And is it always going to be easier to run a negative campaign? Is that the way to the lodge? Ask
and to
John
be
Hewson.
fair, Labor ran a negative campaign in
Mediscare.
Yeah, the Mediscare.
Correct.
And it worked, 3% swing. So it's a depressing reality possibly coming out of tonight. But I keep on coming back to the fact that, Morrison virtually alone on the deck with very little agenda to speak of except their budget, some tax cuts, has potentially done the Houdini act here tonight. Again, we've got to be cautious, but it's going to be one of those remarkable elections if he has pulled it off, a bit like 1993 with Labor when Houston laid out a big program of the GST at the heart of it. There was always some anxieties within Labor ranks that this could be 1993 repeated, and just at the moment it's looking a touch like it.
Well, hung parliament or Houdini act, if the Labor Party loses, do you think that Tanya Plibersek will take leadership?
I don't think the Labor Party is going to lose so badly that there would be an instant uprising. And Tanya is a team player. I think it's much too early to really even contemplate that. I think what would be much more interesting if there is a hung parliament, whichever side gets over to be hung, what sort of government will the Liberal National Party be? And I've just seen there's a swing to George Christensen of 10% in his seat. Now, George Christensen was the candidate who spent a fair bit of time in Manila, not on leave, but as he said, working his electorate remotely on using the wonders of the internet. So, you know, people seem to like the characters. Perhaps they like policy less. And when you are a wealthy country, when you've had 27.5 years of uninterrupted growth, maybe there are other issues that seem to be important to a number of voters in those key seats. But I think what comes out of this election is the fact that we have a very split nation, and it almost, dare I say it, feels a little bit like the big deep chasms that are occurring in our trading partner, the United States of America. I thought we wouldn't go down
the
that
red
path.
States and the blue states.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
We're just going to have to wrap this one up. Our reporter's Jacinta O'Neill is in the electorate of Reed as she got some new information for us. What's the latest?
Hi there. So the latest in Reed is that the Liberal has maintained the seat, the ABC predicts. Right now, Fiona Martin's got a 53.4% vote. This is interesting considering Fiona only joined the campaign last month, and Sam Crosby has campaigning for over a year. So I think that Labor was quite confident that they might win this seat, but it looks like Liberal has pulled through.
Well, Jacinta, Sam Crosby has been campaigning for a year, which is quite unusual. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. He started campaigning last year for the Reed seat. Because of Craig Laundy retiring from the Liberal seat last month, Fiona Martin stepped in.
In the seat of Gilmore, we have David Burnett now, and we're going to cross to him. David, what's the latest on your end?
Yeah, thanks, Ari. There has been a real change in mood at the moment down here in Gilmore. Looking at the national results, there really has been a bit of a not so great results for Labor, and this is kind of playing into the mood. Although things are looking a little bit sombre here, the hope is still up. Looking at the results of Labor locally here in Gilmore, the results are strong. Fiona Phillips is probably going to take this seat. So while people are perhaps taking their wins where they can, looking at Australia nationwide, the mood has subdued quite a bit. But I guess people are just kind of biding their time as we start counting the votes across the west of the nation.
Thanks for that. We'll be taking a quick ad break now, but don't go away. We'll be back right away.
This is Election 2019, with nationwide coverage from journalism students from across Australia.
You're watching Election 2019, presented by The Junction.
Welcome back. Now we're going to cross live to Warringah now, where the seat has just been called. What's the latest down there?
Well, I'm standing here inside the Manly Leagues Club. They've finally let the media in, and behind me, Tony Abbott is just coming out of the room where he gave his conciliatory losing speech. It was a very positive speech. He thanked the people of Warringah, he thanked people who have worked hard to move the election, and he said a Liberal national government can still win, even though he lost.
What's the atmosphere like down there?
I think it's an atmosphere of Auld Lang Syne. I feel like people are sad to see Tony go, but there's a little bit of positivity because the Liberal National Government could win, and I feel like everyone feels like they gave their best in this campaign. They fought really, really hard. Ultimately, it wasn't enough to save Tony, but they gave it a good shot.
We'll cross now to some more seats, but first we'll have a quick discussion on the panel. The seat of Kooyong has just been called. Kooyong, a traditionally safe Liberal seat in the eastern suburbs, safe by a margin of 12.8%, currently held by Treasurer Josh Frydenberg since 2010. Mary, will Josh Frydenberg hold his seat?
Oh yes, Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer of Australia, has held his seat. He's lost a little bit of skin, and of course that's probably the reason why he wasn't campaigning all over the country, as you would normally expect a Treasurer to do. He had to work very hard to make sure that the people of Kooyong retained support of him. It's interesting that Labor has done quite well. There's a swing of 7.2%, but some of that would have gone to the Greens candidate. That's against the Liberal Party. So some of that would have gone to a very high-profile Greens candidate.
How monumental is this win for Josh Frydenberg? We know in the Victorian election there were surprising swings against the Liberals in the region, with 3 of the 4 seats swinging to Labor.
Well, I think people got a bit ahead of themselves actually, and thought because Dan Andrews and the Labor team in Victoria had a very convincing win right across the state, that they started to feel perhaps that they could replicate that in some of these blue chip Liberal seats. I mean, Kooyong has been held by Prime Ministers and Foreign Ministers for the Liberal Party, you know, ever since its beginning, I think. So it was a very big ask. And of course what happened is the progressive or the anti-Liberal vote, if you like, was split between the very high profile Greens candidate and the Labor candidate. So I think Josh Frydenberg has worked well, and he's held on to that seat. He's considered a moderate, and of course he worked very, very hard on the neg, which was Malcolm Turnbull's climate policy, which was sort of knocked off at the end. But he was seen as a person who worked extremely hard on those sorts of policies that seem to be important to electors in Kooyong.
We're just going to have to wrap that one up shortly. Now we're going to go to the seat of Lindsay, where the Liberal Party has just won in the former Labor seat. Joseph has the candidate Diane Beamer with him right now. Joseph, what's going on?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm here with Diane Beamer, the Labor candidate. She's just conceded defeat. Diane, so how? It's not the result you're looking for?
Of course not. We always hope for a Labor win in Lindsay, but it is a tough seat. It is what I describe sometimes as trench warfare, door by door knocking on, phone calls, being at railway stations at 6 o'clock in the morning. I have been so lucky to have such a great team around me. I've rung Melissa McIntosh, the Liberal candidate, to wish her well in her new career, and it's invigorating as well.
So what does this say for your career in politics? Are you going to
I've had
any plans?
16 fabulous years in state government. I was in local government before that. Contesting this seat to see if I could be the federal member was a great opportunity. And whilst I regret I'm not there, I think that democracy is always the winner in these things.
You said to your supporters just then that you see a future in Labor. Would you like to comment on that a bit more?
Look, I think we went to this election with a set of policies which shows Labor's heart. The way in which we wanted to do things for cancer sufferers, for lower paid workers, for childcare workers, bringing back penalty rates. The way in which we wanted TAFE courses so there were young people had a better opportunity to learn a trade. We went there with a comprehensive set of policies which did include tax. And I feel proud of those. They are part of Labor. We're going to have to regroup and rethink, but you do that after every election.
So it's not the result we were looking for, but how do you think it bodes for Labor overall this election? I mean, there's still plenty of seats to come.
I must admit, there's plenty of seats to come. I've hardly kept up with the news of what's happening nationally. Once I get on top of that, I'll be able to comment better. I think we fought a great fight nationally, and I'm proud of the Labor team.
So why do you think Labor can't make headway in Queensland?
I've spent the last 6 months in Lindsay working away to try and win this seat. What happens in other states, what's happening in Victoria, New South Wales and the rest of Queensland, the rest of the country. At this stage, I'm really in the dark about. We've been looking at how our booths are coming in and all of that. So I think we do have to analyse where are the things in what parts of the country that we did wrong, but that happens after every election.
Okay, well, thank you very much for giving us this interview. It's really appreciated.
You're welcome, and keep well.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So there we are, Diane Beamer, the Labor candidate for Lindsay. She just conceded defeat. So that means Lindsay, the extremely marginal Western Sydney seat, is now in Liberal hands.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Joseph. To Western Australia now, and the electorate of Haslett, Kate Purnell is there for us. What seats do the Labor Party need now if they are to have a chance of forming a government?
Yes, well, as it has become very tight, the Labor Party are going to need to gain Hasluck, which the Liberals hold with a 2.1% margin. They will need to regain Cowan, which they hold by a 0.7% margin. Swan will be ideal, which the Liberals hold at 3.6%. And Canning, which is held by 6.8% for the Liberals, and Perth, which is currently held by Labor, they'll need to retain that one, which they have on a 3.3% margin.
Thanks for the update, Kate. We're going to go to a quick ad break now, but we'll be back very shortly.
You're watching The Junction's live coverage of the 2019 federal election.
You're watching Election 2019, live from the studios of RMIT Melbourne, presented by The Junction.
Welcome back. We'll cross to the panel now. Mary, we'll start with you. Your final thoughts and predictions.
I'll never take any notice of opinion polls. They mean absolutely nothing. Australians are independent thinkers and they're going to decide when they go into the polling booth how they're going to vote. My other thought is this is going to be a long, nervous night for both major parties.
Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, we came in tonight, the narrative had been late that there was a narrow path for the coalition, the whole government. As we stand at a few minutes to 9, there's a very narrow path now to Labor to form government. Everything's got to go right in WA. They've got to maybe gain Boothby in South Australia. It looks like the polls have been inverted. It was 51.5 to Labor, and it looks like, if anything, it's 51.5 to the coalition on the figures, and Labor's primary vote has just been too low.
Western Australia, well, 1.4% counted, you know, they've literally counted about 3 votes. But in Curtin, the new candidate there, Celia Hammond, is fairly strongly in front, although that should be quite tight. And in Cowan, Labor's Anne Ali is in front of the Liberal candidate, but again, only 1.8% counted, and it doesn't mean much. But there, Celia Hammond is replacing, I think, Julie Bishop, so that's a seat to watch.
Fantastic. Mary, what have been your thoughts on how parties have run their campaigns during the election?
Well, it's been chalk and cheese. You've had Scott Morrison, Prime Minister, running a very presidential campaign. No ministers much in sight except for Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, on sort of key matters, economic matters. And you've had Labor, which has run a very collectivist approach. The difference also is chalk and cheese between the Liberal National parties with policies that were seen as the budget and infrastructure, but not much after that.
Mary, sorry, I'm going to have to cut you short on that one. We'll have to come to the end of our program now, unfortunately. We'd like to say a big thank you to everyone that's been involved, the countless universities and the students from the Junction, the Judith Neilson Institute for Journalism, our guests, Mary Delahunty, thank you so much, and Paul Strangio, thank you. It's been our pleasure. And my name is Ari Bulbo-Ness.
And I'm Rachel Merritt, and you've been watching Election 2019, coming to you live from the studios of RMIT in Melbourne. Thanks for joining us and have a good night.